To Boston, Bloomberg 1061. To San Francisco, Bloomberg 960. To the country, Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
All right, everybody, you are listening and watching Bloomberg Business Week on this Monday. We see stocks pretty much moving to their highs of the session. But
yeah, there's one stock in there that's not, though. And it's a pretty big one. It's Tesla.
Yeah.
Thanks to some news that we got yesterday about deliveries in the most recent quarter. We're going to dive in with Ed Ludlow in just a few minutes. But first up, Charlie Pellet, we got less than 90 minutes to go to the close.
Indeed, and we are trading at the best level of the day right now. Briefly, Tesla, you guys just talking about it. More with Ed coming up in a moment. But Tesla shares plunging right now by 8.4%. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, they are all electrified. We have got the S&P up 102 now, best level of the day again, up 2.9%. Dow Industrials up right now by 839 points, up 2.9%. NASDAQ rallying up 2.54% right now, up by 268 points. 95% of S&P 500 shares are higher as of now. 10-year yield 3.65%, 2-year yield 4.10%, spot gold up 2.2%, $16.97 the ounce, while West Texas Intermediate crude up 5.1%, $83.53 a barrel. Stocks kicking off the week with gains after suffering their worst September in 2 decades. Priya Misra is head of global rate strategy at TD Securities USA, and on Bloomberg's surveillance this morning, she told us there's no question markets have been under a lot of stress.
You look at any measure of stress, be it volatility, realized, implied, you look at risk assets. I think, what we're dealing with is a global economy that's headed into a recession. And the central bank community is saying, we're focused on inflation. That's public enemy number one. And so their ability to respond is just much lower. So I would say there is stress as people are figuring out how to deal with volatility.
And today, volatility in oil stocks indeed close to the best level of the day, surging. OPEC Plus will consider cutting oil output by more than 1 million barrels a day, according to delegates, when it meets in person on Wednesday for the first time in more than 2 years. Right now, we've got ExxonMobil, case in point, up by 5%. BP, its ADRs up 5.6%. Chevron up 5.6%. EOG Resources up 6.9%. Pioneer Natural up by 6.6%. Recapping Tesla dropping 8.4%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It is indeed. All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Well, as Tim mentioned, we do have a rally, but Tesla not among them. And that has a big reason why is because of some of that news we got over the weekend.
Yeah, joining us right now, we got Ed Ludlow. He's West Coast correspondent. But again, I'm so happy to say he's here in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio for a few more weeks, Ed?
A few more weeks.
That's awesome. From the West Coast to the East Coast. Well, we are grateful to have you here. He, of course, is with Bloomberg News. You can follow him on Twitter at Ed Ludlow. I saw him tweet late yesterday when these numbers came out, breaking numbers with these deliveries actually missing for the most recent quarter. Is it a demand story, Ed?
Tesla says it's not a demand story.
I'm asking you if it's a demand story.
The market is clearly concerned about something. I would say most sell-side analysts in response to the deliveries are sanguine that this is an issue of logistics, like Tesla said. So deliveries came in at 343,830. The street was looking for 358,000. And what Tesla said was, there's always a mad scramble at the end of each quarter to get vehicles to customers. But this time, they have 4 factories in 3 continents around the world. And what happened was these are cars that have been ordered, but they're in transit. You can't book a car as being delivered. You can't book it as revenue until it's actually delivered to a customer. So even though 343 was low, below expectations, it seems like there's a lot of cars out there that were making their way from the factories to the customers, and those don't count, but they will count next quarter.
So shortage of components, and is it a global thing? Is it certain facilities?
It's not really a shortage of components. It's Tesla's ability to put these EVs on a semi-truck and move them from A to B, to put them on a boat. You have to remember...
How come they can't do it?
Well, partly
Can't they
price.
put them on a rocket ship? I mean, this is Elon Musk
I
we're
think
talking about.
this is what you forget. You know, Tesla's a fantastic company, but if you go on the 101 in California, for example, and drive through the middle of that state, you just count dozens, hundreds of trucks carrying 5 or 6 Teslas on each one. That's still how you deliver a vehicle from the factory to the end customer. It's not an issue of part shortage. It's an issue of expedite costs that, because of this mad scramble, Tesla's trying to work out how it can get these vehicles to the customers at the last minute without paying painfully high costs. And, you know, freight has come down from some of the pandemic era highs, but it's still high.
Are we hearing this from Ford, from General Motors, from Volkswagen?
Well, I mean, in Ford and GM's case, they had a slightly different problem, which is they had tens of thousands of vehicles which were missing components, probably semiconductors, and so they were parked on a piece of tarmac somewhere waiting for those missing components to come in. I think there's a real key piece of data that I point to. The production number for the quarter actually exceeded expectations for Tesla, but the percentage of those produced cars that were delivered was really low, about 94%. Often, Tesla will deliver more vehicles than it's produced. And, you know, I think one read on that data is that we do take Tesla at face value. This was their ability to move the vehicles from A to B, not that demand has waned.
So help me out. Like,
Sure.
Are they reaching out to Tesla customers and saying, listen, we can get this to you, but it's going to cost X? Like,
Well,
is that a solution to this problem? And I'm wondering, like, Tesla, I would think buyers can maybe afford to pay a little bit more.
Yes,
if they want their
especially
car.
given that the average selling price is high, you know, for any
Yeah.
Tesla model. There's definitely some cases on Twitter where people that have ordered Tesla said, oh, actually, Tesla reached out to me and asked if I could take delivery in the first week of October or last week of September. And when I said, no, I'm away on vacation, you know, that's the reality of it. And as I said, just remember, you cannot book or mark a vehicle as delivered until it's actually delivered. And them being in transit is a big problem. I go back to a bigger issue, which is 4 factories, 3 continents. You know, Tesla is still new to this in the sense that Berlin just came online, Austin just came online. Previously, if you were in the UK, for example, you'd probably received a Tesla that was built in Fremont, California. Completely illogical to build it and then ship it. So what they're trying to do is even out that regional production and then move the vehicles from where they're produced in those markets.
So give us an update on the factories here. You mentioned Austin, you mentioned Berlin. We have Shanghai as well that is certainly up and running. It's kind of a unique market, if we can call China that. A lot of those stay domestic, right?
So a lot of the Chinese production does stay domestic, but there is export to other markets as well. The China production vehicles are kind of higher margin, which is interesting. We find out about that during earnings. Production in Berlin is still relatively modest. You know, it hasn't been online for that long, but it's ramping up at a click. And as has always been the logic, why build cars in Berlin? Because then you can deliver them to customers within the European Union. It's just that they're ramping up now.
What ends up happening to what's happening at Austin right now, and what ends up happening at the Gigafactory versus what's happening in Fremont?
Yeah, so, you know, Austin is principally building Model Ys, the kind of smallish SUV type vehicle.
And this is a relatively new facility as well.
And it's a relatively new facility in Fremont, California. They build multiple lines, the Y, the 3, and then these smaller volume productions of X and S. And it's exactly as I said, you know, Austin, they will build them and send them around the country here in North America and into other markets. And this is part of the problem, right? Like my dad, for example, has a Model 3. He's very proud that it was built in Fremont, California. If you're a Brit or you're European, you don't want to order a vehicle that's shipped to you from China or from the US. You probably want it built from the European Union. And that's the change that Tesla's going through.
So I'm just interested in Ed's dad's car. So he had it shipped from California to the UK.
Yeah, and he was one of the early adopters in the UK.
So if he were to buy that car now, would it come from Berlin?
It very likely would come from Berlin, but while they were bridging that gap, it may well have come from Shanghai, for example. Wow. So that's what's interesting.
You can't choose where your Model 3
I don't think
though.
you can. No, I think that but this is what the little wording that was in the Tesla press release. This is what we're latching on, evening out of global production.
Well, so from what we got today, what do you focus on, and what should everybody as investors to say it's not just an evening out of production, but something else?
There are cynics on the street that, you know, the stock ultimately is down by the most since mid-June. That this is a demand issue, but those cynics would also say, well, if these cars were in transit, they'll show up in the December data. The December quarter could be astonishingly good. We also have earnings later this month in October 29th, I believe. I checked the Bloomberg terminal. But Tesla is actually pretty transparent.
October 19th.
Yes, you're right, 19th. So Zach Kirkhorn, the CFO, often does give granularity about the supply chain issues that they're experiencing. He often does explain the specific bottlenecks and also the higher input costs. They talked in Musk, actually I say they, Musk tweeted about it, about them battling these expedite costs, the cost of scrambling at the last week of the quarter.
Right.
What are those costs? We don't actually know if they were freight in terms of semi-trucks, ocean freight. We'd love to hear more about that.
Right, some more color on this. And we'd love to hear more about, how does Dad like the Tesla?
He loves his Tesla.
Okay.
Is there some conflict of interest here? Are you allowed
Other EVs are available in all markets around the world.
Okay, there we go.
Full disclosure, full disclosure. All right, Ed Ludlow, thank you so much. West Coast correspondent on the East Coast for us, lucky for us, here at Bloomberg News, joining us in our Interactive Broker studio. But as he mentioned, Tesla's shares still under pressure, hovering near their lows of the session, down about 8.2%.
All right, we got West Coast, we got East Coast. Let's go to Mid-Atlantic now and talk to Nancy Lyons, who's standing by for World and National News in Washington, D.C. Hey, Nance.
Thanks, Tim. President Biden and First Lady Jill Biden are in Puerto Rico, meeting with community leaders and discussing recent damage from Hurricane Fiona. While on his way there, Biden said he felt the U.S. territory had not been taken very good care of. He is set to announce Puerto Rico will be receiving more than $60 million in disaster recovery funds through the bipartisan infrastructure law. Officials in Florida, meanwhile, say search and rescue teams there are still searching for victims from Hurricane Ian. And Lee County Sheriff Carmine Marcino says they're also targeting looters.
You go in that house, you're going to be carried out. I want to be very clear about that. We have law and order.
Lee County Sheriff Carmine Marcino. It is the first Monday of October, and that means a new term for the Supreme Court. And it's already out with some big decisions.
The justices have left the federal ban on bump stocks intact. Those are the attachments that make semi-automatic rifles fire like machine guns. They rejected 2 challenges to the ban, including one from the National Rifle Association. The High Court also agreed to take up a case that could decide whether social media companies can be sued for content recommendations linked to terrorist attacks. It's a challenge to Section 230 protections for social media, and the court rejected a bid from MyPillow CEO Mike Lindell aimed at derailing a defamation lawsuit against him from Dominion Voting Systems. In Washington, I'm Nathan Hager, Bloomberg Radio.
Kim Kardashian will pay $1.26 million to settle SEC allegations that she broke U.S. rules by touting a crypto token without disclosing she was being paid for the promotion. Her attorney says she settled the case to avoid a protracted dispute. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Nancy Lyons.
All right, Nance, thank you so much. Carol Master along with Tim Stanovic live in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio, streaming on YouTube. In the upcoming issue of Bloomberg Business Week, out later this week, a story about the millions in cryptocurrency that vanished as agents watched helplessly.
We got Joel Weber with us. He's the editor of Bloomberg Business Week. He's right now in the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. You can follow him at Joel Weber Show on Twitter. Also with us is Pat Regnier. He's markets and finance editor for Bloomberg Business Week. He's with us right now in the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. So Joel, when we talk about crypto, we often think about it being used for, I mean, in the early days, right? The early narrative
buying pizzas?
Yeah. Was that 8 Bitcoin or something for pizza? Yeah.
Worth a lot more than pizza now.
Or people storing their Bitcoin and forgetting their password. What about watching the Bitcoin just get stolen from you right in front of your very own eyes?
Yeah, that kind of good segue into this current story by David Voriakis and my colleague Pat Regnier, who's the finance editor at Business Week, will also join us to talk about this. So yeah, remotely swiping Bitcoin that's been seized by the government. That doesn't like totally make sense. You would think that you couldn't do such a thing, but it turns out maybe you could, Pat. So what happened?
Yeah, so the first thing I asked David when I read an early draft of the story was, so the feds had basically seized these things that kind of look like a small hard drive, or actually they kind of look like an MP3 player, and put it in a storage locker. And I asked the dumb question, so why didn't they just unplug it? It's not that simple, and the feds knew it isn't that simple. What's actually on one of these storage devices is really just series of cryptographic private keys. Bitcoin, of course, crypto, lives on the blockchain. And if you have the right set of passwords, you can reconstruct all those keys somewhere else. So when the feds basically seized this cache of Bitcoin as evidence in a money laundering case, they knew from the get-go that this money was very vulnerable to being taken. So they were kind of like watching on the blockchain what was happening with these wallets, and they very quickly saw those coins going away.
So what's also interesting here, so this arrest,
Yes.
let's talk about Larry, because there are people in the story and in crypto who are memorable. Larry might be one of them. It's something of a milestone.
It's always
David,
a Larry, right, that gets into it. No, just kidding.
My
Sorry,
dad's
Larry's.
name. I definitely
All right,
know
except
what
for
you
your
mean.
dad.
But you referred to it, but in David's words, as something of a milestone in crypto enforcement. Why?
Well, so the first character in the story, Larry, ran a what's called a tumbler or a mixer. So basically, this is a thing that you can use to, if you want to sort of make your cryptocurrency transaction truly private, right? Because you can always see addresses on the blockchain, and if you can kind of stitch together enough information, you can kind of figure out where a bit of Bitcoin came from. There are these services called mixers and tumblers where you sort of like, it's what it sounds like, right? You just sort of mix together a lot of cryptocurrency and then spit them out in different ways so that you can't find it.
I'm visualizing, Pat, like a rock tumbler that you had when you were a kid, and I think that's, I don't know, perhaps that's where the name comes from, right? You put a bunch of rocks in, you let it set for a month, and the rocks that come out look completely different.
Yeah, I think that's basically right. Or you're just sort of you're stirring everything together so that you can't figure out sort of where they came from. And that's not per se illegal, but as with a lot of things in money laundering, you know, running a secret car wash isn't necessarily illegal either, but if you're doing it to hide where the money is coming from, then that's what's happening. So the feds went after our first character, Larry, for basically money laundering. And then while he was, I'm sorry, not while he was being held, he was out on bail, suddenly the money began to disappear, and they started asking, okay, so who's actually taking the money out of it? And ultimately, they decided, they've actually accused not Larry, but his brother Gary of doing this. And so...
Can't make this up.
Right.
Larry and Gary.
So Gary is still awaiting trial, we should say, so this is an allegation, but they're looking at they've been following the money.
Well, speaking of following the money, I cannot do an interview with you, Pat, without talking about this picture of Gary Harmon that's featured in, I don't know if we can get it up on YouTube. We don't have it on YouTube, so you're going to have to check it out in the magazine. But it's Gary Harmon in a tub full of money. This is a picture that the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia has. What's going on here?
Well, so that's a picture that prosecutors found on his phone. Basically, they were collecting evidence that he had come into money. So they're sort of looking at that and saying, it's like, oh, it looks like this guy suddenly, you know, had a fair amount of money. That's not the only thing.
He's bathing in cash.
No,
he's bathing in cash.
To be fair, it does look, if you look closely, mostly $1 bills.
I can tell those are $1 bills.
Maybe a couple $2 bills in there that Grandma gave him.
So you're saying like $600 at the most here, Joel?
It looks a little bit less than that, but yeah.
Is this what you want to do for your birthday?
I mean, it suddenly seems like a good idea.
That's a fair
Just don't take a photo of it.
Right.
So how did this all kind of unfold? I mean, and how it all came to be?
So, our reporter, David Voriakis, I mean, he's always sort of like watching court cases, and so he's been, sort of looking at how these cases have been moving through court. But what this is really a case of like in the early, there are people who want to use Bitcoin to make transactions that maybe you shouldn't be making.
No.
There's a place called the Darknet where people do that, sort of a part of the internet that's not easily accessible on Google. And so first of all, you're connecting in buyers and sellers, but then the question is, so how do the buyers and sellers pay for the things that you're not supposed to be paying for? Bitcoin is one way, but as we've just discussed, it's not perfectly anonymous. There are services that are actually very good at following the breadcrumbs. So Larry Harmon's innovation was finding a way to obscure those transactions, and it was very successful, and it got the government's attention. And as you know, this is not the only service that's gotten the government's attention since then, right?
Exactly.
There's another one called Tornado Cash, and I think a lot of people who are in this are asking like how long will these mixers be around?
Okay, so just bring it back to the swipe of this. So we've got some interesting people, and there's a hard drive full of Bitcoin. Bitcoin is now worth more than it was then. What did law enforcement observe? Like, what did it look like from a law enforcement perspective?
So what does it look like when your Bitcoiner disappearing?
Yeah.
Basically, yeah. So they've got the devices in a locker, but what you really want to watch, where the action is on the blockchain, and so you're looking at wallets. So they had a list of like 16 wallets. What does a wallet look like? I mean, you're just looking at an address with a bunch of numbers, and then there's just a certain number of Bitcoin assigned to it. And then they could begin to see, like, those Bitcoin were just going away, or they're getting transacted away. And they're like,
should have unplugged the hard drive.
Yeah, we should have unplugged the hard drive. As we said, it doesn't really matter whether you unplug the hard drive.
That's what I was wondering.
Playbook yet?
That's what I was wondering. If you do have one of these USB or old school, MP3 player type things, and that's what you store your Bitcoin on.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean it's not safe? Like, it can still be accessed because it's...
Well, what everyone in crypto will tell you is the most important thing is to never give away your seed phrase. So seed phrase is a thing that can be used to basically reconstruct
The
your
raven
private
lands
keys.
at midnight.
So, yeah.
That's not mine.
So
is that what you mean?
Yeah. Do you? It's something literally like a bunch of random numbers, or I'm sorry, not a bunch of random numbers, a string of random words. There's usually 12, sometimes 24. And I am not an expert on how the cryptography works, but it's cryptographically related to, I believe, the private keys that you're using. And so if you enter that seed phrase, and this is not just with a hardware wallet, this is with a software wallet, that seed phrase is the thing it's the key to everything. Every time I look at crypto, because I work for Bloomberg, I can't really own crypto, but every time I do, I think I would have a nervous breakdown if I ever had to do anything with crypto, because the first thing you have to do is you have to, safely store it, and you have to then write down your seed phrase. And now you've got two problems. You're either going to lose that seed phrase, or somebody will find that seed phrase. That would make me so anxious. That would make me unbelievably anxious, and I would like to talk to, at some point, people who have large Bitcoin investments and ask them how they handle that emotionally, because it's quite a wild thing. I mean, I think people even come up with objects that they engrave seed phrases into, and they bury them in secret places and things like that.
Wow.
But yet, to get out on bail, as David's story brings us back to July 2021, after his arrest, and he's been accused of money laundering, Gary was, he requests bail, right? And then prosecutors said to secure bail, Gary should have to turn over seed phrases to the stolen Bitcoin. His lawyer said that condition would force him to admit crimes, which violates his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, which I thought was a very fitting way to kind of wrap this story, was with the government asking for those same seed phrases.
That's right. That's quite a catch-22 to be in. I think probably his lawyer had a point.
Hence why you have counsel.
Okay, I have one more question for Pat. I just want to dig in deep on this. So does that mean if you buy Bitcoin or Ether from PayPal or something, you don't really own it? Because you can use these traditional TradFi services to actually do that.
Sure. I mean, there's so many ways to own Bitcoin. I mean, if you talk to hardcore crypto people, there's a phrase called "not your keys, not your coins," right? And they're big believers that you've got to have the keys and you have to have ultimate control. But a simpler way to buy Bitcoin is the way that you buy a share of Apple stock, which is you just go onto some brokerage site that's selling crypto, and you tell them that you would like to buy some, and then they buy them, or maybe they're working with a middleman who buys them, and they're just remembering that you have it, right? And they're just keeping a ledger. So it's this funny case where, the idea of crypto is there's this big public ledger, and you don't use a middleman to go on the ledger. But a lot of people, it's you just want to be invested in the thing that you think is either going up or going down. And so you do a lot of not very crypto-ish things to do that. And you just ask somebody else to hold your crypto for you.
Is the government getting better on figuring all this out?
They seem to be.
Okay.
I mean, I think we actually ran a story a few weeks ago about a company called Chainalysis that is sort of one of the companies that the government works with to figure this out, and they trace these breadcrumbs.
Deep tease for our crypto show, Crypto IRL. It airs now Thursday nights on Bloomberg Quick Take, and then Fridays on Bloomberg TV. We are going to have a good episode with Chainalysis coming up in just a few weeks.
Great. Well, I hope that wasn't a spoiler.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't. Don't worry. We haven't filmed it yet, so we can choose. We can choose if it's a spoiler or not.
It's so funny because I thought this was going to be the way to kind of evade government oversight, and yet we're finding out no.
Well, I mean, you know, the thing is that in the end, it's like there's what happens on the blockchain, but there's also still what happens in the real world. And like what this story will tell you is like, you know, they may not be able to keep your crypto in jail, but they can put you in jail.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
That's the thing to remember. That's the power that the state has.
It's a great story, and it's going to be in the upcoming issue of Bloomberg Business Week on newsstands later this week, already on the Bloomberg terminal. You can also find it at bloomberg.com/businessweek. Pat Regnier, thank you so much. Markets and finance editor at Bloomberg Business Week here in our interactive broker studio, along with the editor of Bloomberg Business Week, Joel Weber, also joining us in studio. The story by David Voriakos, a must read. I feel like we continue to learn so much more in terms of size and scope when it comes to crypto.
Yeah, we really do. This is a great piece. Check it out. It's in the upcoming issue of Bloomberg Business Week magazine. In the meantime, I do want to get a quick check of the markets because we are seeing a 3 right now in the S&P 500 up more than 0.3%, the Dow up 0.3%, the NASDAQ up more than 2.7%.
We're going to head over to our TV colleagues, talk about the markets and this rally in just a moment.
close. Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage ahead of the U.S. market close starts right now.
This is Countdown to the Close, just 60 minutes left in your trading session. Caroline Hine, Romain Bostic, joined now by our colleagues Carol Basser, Tim Stenovic. We go cross-platform as we always do, TV, radio, YouTube. We shout out Taylor Riggs, who has run yet another marathon successfully. And today, well, she's risk on in her legs, we're risk on in the market. June 24th, is the last time we rose this much.
Yeah, it's pretty significant, and we're continuing to see the equity side of the universe trend even higher. Here we are at our highs of the session. But you know what's not partaking in this kind of enthusiasm in the market is the commodity space, continuing to be under pressure. I took a look at the Bloomberg Commodity Spot Index. It's down just about 1%. But if you look at things like lumber or copper, container freight, all of this has come down, and you're saying, yeah. But I'm saying, yeah, Romain, because what does this say about the economy more broadly? How much is global recession? How much is a pandemic reset?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're starting to see a little bit of green on the day, but yeah, definitely the longer term trend, particularly when it comes to a lot of the base metals like copper, aluminum, things that basically go into manufacturing.
Mike McGlone over at Bloomberg Intelligence loves to look at copper as an indicator, and he sees warning signs there. I was looking for some outperformance, though, and I see that with the KBW Bank Index. The banks are higher today. Goldman Sachs upgrading Wells Fargo. We're seeing that lead bank stocks higher. On the other end, we did see Citigroup downgraded from buy to neutral, though not weighing too much on the entire index.
I mean, it is phenomenal how much we see a correlation in stocks and in bonds today. We see banks go higher even as yields go lower. We're looking overall at the S&P 500 currently up 3%. As I said, the best day since June 24th. Volumes actually being elevated as well a little bit on the S&P. We're seeing some commitment to this trade. We're up 13% in terms of volumes. Dow is up more than 3%. It's too seeing volumes on the upside. NASDAQ up 2.66%. So actually a vague laggard, and actually volumes on the downside for your big tech. But Russell 2000, small caps, up more than 50 points. That's more than 3% on the higher side, Romain.
Well, all 11 sectors in the S&P 500 are in the green. Energy stocks out in front in a big way, up about 6%. To the bottom of that list is consumer discretionary, which is only up, well, a measly 1% here. But you can see, once again, this is kind of that everything rally that we're seeing. When you look at the S&P groups, though, the 24 groups, there is one group out of the 24 that is down. That is the autos and component index. And a big part of the reason is because of the big downdraft that we're seeing from Tesla. Tesla shares are down about 7% here on the day here, having one of their worst days that we've seen going back to the middle of this year after they had a miss on those deliveries here. It wasn't a huge miss, and we know that in the past when they've missed in a particular quarter or a particular month, they tend to make that back up in the months and quarters ahead. But at least for right now, some folks are a little bit concerned as to what they saw out of those numbers. ExxonMobil rallying hard on the day, up about 5%. And here's a tale of two companies. Pete Dioteris, who helps run a lot of our markets coverage here, said this to me this morning. He said, between Blue Apron and Peloton, which one of these companies is still going to be in business 10 years from now? Blue Apron right now down about 42% here on the day. Peloton, meanwhile, up about 6% here on the day. A lot of concerns for both companies about their long-term trajectory, but at least Peloton, they got that big deal with Hilton. They're going to put all these Pelotons. I know you're a big Peloton rider, Caroline, in all the hotels.
Well, I remember when we were in LA, we were both using the Pelotons in that particular hotel.
I did,
yeah, it's a nice way to get it. And I have to say, I think it is perhaps a gateway into deciding actually Peloton is something you want to try on the longer term. Although I would say the Peloton app is very good in your hotel room if you don't want to be getting on a bike. Meanwhile,
but then you have to have the bike. Don't you have to buy the bike in your room?
No, you could do Pilates. I could do bar if I wanted to.
It's a whole new world.
All manner of things you could
Can
be
you
doing.
get Blue Apron delivered to your room? Because that seems to be the bigger issue.
Well, I think you'd lack a gas ring or something there would be an issue. But let's have a quick look at what's happening in terms of your assets, because this is another one for Pete Dioteris. Positive stock-bond correlation. Look, the problem here is that as stocks are rising, bonds are also rising. Well, if we start to flip that around again, it might mean that we're back to losing on your 60-40. Where's the diversification, Carol?
Where is the diversification? What's interesting is we continue to track all of the Fed speak, and Dr. Ed Yardeni, runs his own research firm, really someone who's watched so many different market cycles, and of course coined the bond vigilante term about when the bond market really is opposed and protesting what's going on in terms of monetary policy. Well, he reined in a little bit earlier about watching financial market conditions. He's definitely concerned, and he pointed out to the Fed Vice Chairman Lael Brainard also talking about her concerns.
The idea of the opera came to me on Friday when Fed Chair Lael Brainard gave a speech in which she basically indicated the Fed is sort of between a rock and a hard place. I think it's actually between Volcker 2.0 and Bernanke 2.0. And so it is kind of a bearish opera. And the conclusion is that the opera ain't over until the Fed lady sings a more optimistic tune. She was very concerned about financial stability. It's really the first time that a Fed official talking about financial stability. And you said on the show that the financial stability is, in fact, one of the mandates. And the question is, how important is it? And I think it's number one.
All right, that, of course, Ed Yardeni of Yardeni Research, and he does think that there's one more rate hike coming in November. He says that will be it because the financial stability issue will pop up as a primary concern. It's something we have increasingly been talking about.
Well, the thing is, as Mike McKee brought up earlier, is the question about, how many more Fed hikes? Is that important, or is it more important to think about how long it's going to be until the Fed actually cuts interest rates? And I think, he was making the argument that, well, it's a lot more important for us to think about how long the Fed is going to keep rates high, even though we're starting to see some talk of a pivot here.
Well, and I thought, too, like one of the interesting comments that he made, too, is this idea that the sort of the laser focus on the Fed's funds rate, and this was actually something that Taylor Riggs brought up last week, the idea as to whether they should be paying more attention to the balance sheet and using that as a mechanism, and that actually might further their aims by and at the same time limit some of the pain to the economy and to financial markets.
And the financial markets is all the issue of liquidity, concerns about, of course, the conditions, financial conditions, which are contracting. We had that note, of course, Mike Wilson really shining a light on the fact that monetary, and two, the money supply really dialing back when you're starting to look at what's happening in the US, but globally, Japan and Asia and Europe. Suddenly there speaks perhaps that a Federal Reserve that can release and ease that pain, but what does that mean for earnings in the longer term?
Well, that's the big question, and that's something that we brought up earlier with Gina Martin-Adams, who joined us on the program, talking about what to expect from companies as they start to report earnings just a couple of weeks away from JP Morgan. That's a big one.
She did say expectations are really, really low, so the bar is kind of low for companies to beat it, but we will certainly see when they start to report. All right, guys, we're going to be back in less than an hour's time. Our cross-platform.
Can we talk Kim Kardashian then?
Yeah, Carol's very eager to talk about this.
I said we buried the lead earlier at the top of our broadcast. We are going to talk about Kim K and the SEC.
Should we take financial advice from her?
She's doing pretty well. I don't know about her bank account, but it's definitely looking better than mine, I'm just going to say. I don't know. All right. Somber. Okay, we'll be back.
Don't take financial advice from any of us, nor Kim Kardashian.
1.3 million fine is really going to hurt her.
We'll be back.
Exactly. Where's she going to find the money for that?
We're probably easy to write a check. All right. Probably not in crypto, though. But too soon. Too soon.
I don't know if the SEC
Stable coins.
Too soon. All right. We'll be back in less than an hour's time. Our cross-platform, radio, TV, YouTube, beyond the bell. We're going to count you down to the close on this Monday.
This is Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Bloomberg Quick Takes Tim Stenovic on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, you are listening and watching Bloomberg Business Week on this Monday. Carol Masser along with Tim Stenovic, and we are waiting some comments from President Biden. He is in Florida getting ready
Puerto Rico.
Oh, Puerto Rico,
yeah,
forgive
for
me.
his first stop.
That's right.
Florida later this week.
Yeah, exactly. And is expected to announce a big package in terms of funding to strengthen Puerto Rico's resilience to flooding. Again, obviously we know devastated once again by another storm, this time around the Hurricane Ian, of course, but they were just still dealing with the previous hurricane and trying to get back on track.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, he does later this week plan to head to Florida. And there's also, Carol, I mean, I think it's important to talk about the optics and politics of this, too, because there is a midterm election coming up. And, especially when it comes to Florida and Ron DeSantis, the question of what it means for the federal government to help out the state and what we see from other Republicans in terms of aid packages and supporting the state, because they haven't always been supportive of helping out in the wake of natural disasters, regardless of the state, if we're talking New York, California, or Florida.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. And there are times where many would say, it's time for, put politics aside and figure out what U.S. citizens need
easy
in terms
for
of
you
recovery
to say, right?
efforts. Yeah, it's certainly easy for me to say, but politicians certainly see it often very differently. President Biden has vowed to commit the full strength of the federal government in recovery efforts in Puerto Rico and, of course, also the U.S. mainland in response to the two hurricanes. Remember, it was Ian and Hurricane Fiona, and that's what really Puerto Rico is dealing with.
Now, let's get an update on world and national news as we continue to wait for the president live from Puerto Rico. For that, we turn to Nancy Lyons in D.C. Hey, Nance.
Thanks, Tim. Well, the U.S. Supreme Court says it will take up cases against Google and Twitter on the grounds that algorithms fed Islamic State propaganda so broadly they bore some responsibility for terrorist attacks around the world.
Social media have been protected by a section of communications law that absolves them of responsibility for what users upload. Carter Phillips, a leading Supreme Court lawyer, noted in a Bloomberg interview.
The basic allegation is that YouTube and Twitter and Facebook, using their algorithms, were able to promote these terrorist acts because they allowed ISIS to communicate not only with its immediate membership, but also to effectively recruit more broadly.
The Supreme Court could reinterpret the platform's ability to edit content, which conservatives say has often been used against them. In Washington, Irv Chapman, Bloomberg Radio.
There are no specific threats to U.S. voting systems for the upcoming midterm elections, but the FBI said today the message that the results cannot be trusted is being amplified online. The messaging is being pushed in states across the country by political candidates and others in the U.S., and it's also being spread by Russia and to some degree China. Former U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson has been testifying today as a government witness at the trial of Donald Trump ally Tom Barrack. Tillerson recounted for jurors in a Brooklyn courtroom how he was hired after meeting Trump for an hour in December of 2016. Trump then fired Tillerson in March of 2018. Barrack, founder of Colony Capital and a longtime Trump friend, is accused of trying to influence U.S. policy on behalf of the United Arab Emirates. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Nancy Lyons.
All right, Nance, thank you so much. Nancy Lyons, Inter 99.1 Newsroom in Washington, D.C. We are keeping an eye on Puerto Rico as we are expecting to hear from President Biden, and he is expected to announce funding to help Puerto Rico following the devastation left by Hurricane Fiona. So we are watching and monitoring that situation. As soon as the president begins to speak, we will take you there live. In the meantime, we continue to assess the costs and the toll as a result of a couple of hurricanes that have hit Puerto Rico and also the United States.
Yeah. We're talking about the mainland, of course. 5 days, after Hurricane Ian slammed into Florida, bringing it with deadly storm surge. We're seeing catastrophic flooding and powerful winds. The destruction it caused is now becoming clear. The death toll, Carol, from Ian is now at 58. That's according to officials, adding to fatalities in Cuba and North Carolina. Insured losses have risen to as much as $57 billion. That's according to the modeler Verisk. President Biden, as you mentioned, scheduled to come to Florida this Wednesday. There, he'll survey the damage from what he described as one of the worst storms to ever hit the U.S. Biden right now in Puerto Rico, where the U.S. government has pledged more than $60 million in funding to help the island rebuild after Hurricane Fiona.
And what's interesting, if we just go back to Florida, and of course, those cities looking to rebuild from the devastation of Hurricane Ian will be financing their efforts during the worst environment for municipal borrowing in more than a decade. I mean, there's so many different macro stories that are underway at this time, and you look at the devastation and what it will take in terms of time, cost, effort to rebuild the impact, particularly along that Florida coast. So that is certainly something. And I would say for Puerto Rico, I feel like it's been one devastation after another in terms of trying to rebuild as a result of storms.
I think there are also important conversations that will be had in the coming weeks and months about where exactly should be rebuilt and where shouldn't be rebuilt. If you do have storms like this hit so frequently, are these areas where people should live? Yeah,
my husband and I were talking about these coastal areas, and I think in terms of flood insurance policies, I don't think they were able to get federal.
They weren't able to get federal?
I thought they weren't, and I thought there was a state agency that actually did it. But you do wonder, we've talked about it here even on the East Coast, where there are a lot of homes along the coast and the beach communities, I should say, and then there's the questions about rebuild and who covers those costs specifically. So it's a big question. In terms of the cost of the effort to help Puerto Rico recover from Hurricane Fiona, it will run into the billions. That's the head of the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Right now, to Puerto Rico and the president.
I don't want the headline to read, Biden brings storm to Puerto Rico. So I'm going to maybe have to cut this a little short. Let me start off by saying that Jill and I, and thank you very much for that lovely introduction. Jill and I we're anxious to be here. You know, I come from the little state of Delaware. It's not like the congresswoman from New York. She's from the big state. But we have a very, in relative terms, large Puerto Rican population in Delaware, relative to our population. We have the 8th largest black population in the country, and between all minorities, we have 20% of our state is minority. And so I was sort of raised in the Puerto Rican community at home politically. And so we came here for a long time, both for business and pleasure, since you're part of the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, and Delaware is as well, and I was chairman of the Judiciary Committee. I spent a lot of time in the northern part of the state. But look, it's people like you who do so much for your community and are going to make such a big difference as Puerto Rico rebuilds. Thank you, Governor, for your partnership as we work together to help rebuild Puerto Rico. And I mean rebuild it all, and rebuild it in a resilient way. So you don't, when storms come again, which they will, they're not having the damage they caused before. And I want to thank the members of Congress and local officials, community leaders who have joined us today. Ever since the hurricane struck, Jill and I have had people in Puerto Rico on our minds and in our prayers. We came here in person to show that we're with you. All of America is with you as you receive and recover and rebuild. I'm confident we're going to be able to do all you want, Governor, and I'm committed to this island. Puerto Rico has been through so much in recent years. Hurricane Maria 5 years ago, a 6.4 magnitude earthquake 2 years ago. The folks slept outside for days, worried about their homes would collapse on them if they went in. Then COVID-19, and then Fiona. And yes, Puerto Rico is a strong place, and Puerto Ricans are strong people, but even so, you have had to bear so much and more than need be, and you haven't gotten the help in a timely way. And this latest storm dealt a serious blow to all the hard work that has been done since Maria. Roads and bridges built after Maria have been washed away again. Families who spent their savings to build new homes after losing their last ones have seen them flooded away. Crops decimated, farms destroyed. Here in Ponce and communities nearby have been hit the hardest. And in for days, people live without power, without water, some still in that circumstance. No idea when to be back again. And for everyone who survived Maria, Fiona must have been an all too familiar nightmare. You know better than anyone that over time, these losses add up. And so Puerto Ricans have lost loved ones in this storm and in the perilous disasters. And the number can feel abstract sometimes when you hear a number, but every number is a person, every life lived. We read the obituaries and remembrances, and they all feel like people we knew. Doting grandparents, devoted parents, christened children, longtime neighbors, people who cared about their community and made a difference. And they will not be forgotten. And then through these disasters, so many people have been displaced from their homes, lost their jobs and savings, or suffered injuries, often unseen, but many times seen. Yet somehow, the people of Puerto Rico keep getting back up with resilience and determination. Quite frankly, it's pretty extraordinary when you look at it from afar. And you deserve every bit of help your country can give you. That's what I'm determined to do, and that's what I promise you. After Maria, Congress approved billions of dollars for Puerto Rico, much of it not having gotten here initially. We're going to make sure you get every single dollar promised. And I'm determined to help Puerto Rico build faster than in the past and stronger and better prepared for the future. And that's why I approved emergency declarations of Puerto Rico before the hurricane. Governor, remember my call on you before the hurricane made landfall to deliver immediate federal funding to shelter people and provide essential support. Just a few days later, I approved an expedited major disaster declaration. That means federal government will cover 100% of the cost to clear debris and carry out search and rescue and continue to shelter people. It also means homeowners, renters, business owners are eligible to apply for federal help to recover damaged losses caused by Hurricane Fiona. The federal government is going to provide individual assistance for up to $37,900 for essential home repairs and another $37,900 for lost property, as the law calls for, like a car or a refrigerator. Additionally, we've deployed more than 1,200 personnel from FEMA the Army Corps of Engineers, the U.S. Coast Guard, the Department of Energy, the Environmental Protection Agency. They include search and rescue, teams to assist survivors, and power restoration experts. Power is now back, as you pointed out, governed at 92% of the island, and water is back at 95% of the island, thanks in part to the dedicated IBEW workers and federal support staff. Now we have to get to 100%. And here at this facility, you can see some of the generators from FEMA and the Army Corps of Engineers that were transporting to places that still don't have power. Here they're loaded onto trucks and brought to locations and hospitals and shelters, paired with fuel trucks so generators can be gassed up on site. My administration is also providing financial assistance to help families and individuals right away. Many families are scrambling to pay their bills right now to fill up their gas tank, to put food on the table. They can register at FEMA, cash assistance for $700 to help cover the essentials for just a little while. So far, nearly 200,000 households across Puerto Rico have received this cash assistance. $700 won't replace what you lost, not even close, but it can help take care of some of the little basics while you catch your breath and get back on your feet. And FEMA has made crisis counselors available when you're, whether you're a survivor or a first responder. If you need help or just someone to talk to, people are here for you. The hotline number is 800-981-0023. I'll say it again, 800-981-0023. Don't be embarrassed to call. Whether you're Spanish or English-speaking, counselors will be standing by to help you. And at times like these, Americans come together. And I'm grateful for our personnel of FEMA and other agencies for the hard work these past few weeks. Many of our FEMA staff has been pointed out.
All right, folks, you've been listening to President Biden there in Puerto Rico with the First Lady, and he is expected to announce more than $60 million in funding to strengthen Puerto Rico's resilience to flooding, in terms of recovery efforts from the devastation left by Hurricane Fiona. So it's just one of the big stories, obviously, that we are following here in the United States.
Yeah, again, the president in Puerto Rico today, but on Wednesday he is scheduled to visit storm-ravaged parts of Florida, where the death toll from Hurricane Ian right now is at 58.
All right, so we've talked about a lot of things. Certainly, we've been very big macro, I feel like, over the last couple of weeks. We've talked about the global dollar problem, the global race to hike rates, and the impact that's having on the global recession. That and more are just some of the stories that are top of mind for the editorial director of Bloomberg New Economy, Eric Schatzker, who is joining us here in the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. I feel like when we think about the new economy for the world, there's just so much coming at it right now.
There is, but as you correctly pointed out, Carol, few issues rise as high on the agenda as some of these macroeconomic challenges, specifically the higher dollar. I think this is something that escapes the attention of many Americans, and for that matter, many people in developed parts of the world. The impact that a strong dollar has on emerging markets is really, really hard to overstate, especially at a time like this when the entire globe is struggling with inflation.
Is it all about repayment of debt, Eric, or is that only part of the story?
No, I would say there's a trifecta of headaches that emerging markets have to confront when faced with a dollar as strong as it is now. And by some measures, as you know, the dollar is stronger than it's ever been. It may not look that way on some charts, but if you make certain adjustments, it does look that way. On the one hand, imports become more expensive in local currency terms, right? And so that fans the inflationary fire. Secondly, your own currency, that is, if you're living in an emerging market, becomes weaker, and that can serve to stimulate exports, which stimulates growth, which is also inflationary. And then finally, to your point, Tim, yes, in dollar terms, and let's face it, most of these countries have historically and currently borrow in dollars, debt service payments become more expensive, onerous to the point where a number of these countries may face the risk of default in the coming months if they can't find more local currency that translates into dollars to make these payments.
Right. It's just a reminder that, these moves that we were seeing by central banks, in particular the U.S. central bank, like there are implications that are really broad. I love the story that has been around by Liz McCormick, and this was the cover of Bloomberg Business Week, that the U.S. is like, we don't care because this is actually helpful for the Fed, right, in its fight against inflation, potentially.
It's hard to say. You don't want to put those words in Jay Powell's mouth. We don't care. But to a degree, they don't. They have a job, right? They have two mandates, right? One is quote unquote full employment, and the other is price stability. And price stability is paramount at the moment when you've got inflation running close to 9%. You have to get it back down to 2%, come what may. And come what may includes all kinds of instability in the emerging markets. I do want to point out that this is on the Fed's radar screen. Lael Brainerd, one of the Fed's governors, vice chair, in fact, said at a conference last week that it's important to consider how cross-border spillovers and spillbacks might interact with financial vulnerability. She's clearly pointing there to a worst-case scenario.
So, Eric, how does this story end, and how do we look at
it? Doesn't end well.
Well,
right? It doesn't.
We have examples from the 1980s, from the 1990s. Can we look to those, or is this time different?
Well, of course, the world will move on eventually. It's different in the sense that we're living with inflation right now. The last time the developed economies got together and struck what was known in 1985, as the Plaza Accord, because it was reached just blocks from here at the Plaza Hotel at the southeast corner of Central Park. Paul Volcker, the then Fed chair, had already succeeded in taming the inflationary beast. It's very difficult for these economies to get together, and of course we're living in a very different world, and depreciate the dollar when that runs counter to the Fed's needs. It feels like this has a ways to play out, right? We haven't yet seen inflation begin to moderate in the United States. We haven't seen the labor market start to weaken. We haven't seen inflationary expectations become re-anchored to something in the neighborhood of 2%. And the general consensus seems to be that some of those things are going to start to happen. The data dependency that the Fed is looking for before you can begin to see the end of this movie. It doesn't appear as though a 1985-style Plaza Accord is on the table. Brian Deese, in the White House recently said that he didn't see it happening. Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, indicated that she didn't envision anything like that in the short run.
Yeah, and I mean, this is the tricky part. And we were talking about this with Mike McKee earlier, that this whole idea of, this Fed, ultimately they will turn in terms of policy. The problem is we don't know exactly when. And at this point, whether it's inflation or whether the Fed keeps rates higher for longer, maybe they don't keep raising rates, these numbers are going to stick around for a while.
And one of the worst parts for the emerging markets is that those economies themselves have to fight back by raising rates themselves or intervening in the currency market. We've seen Japan intervene, South Korea, Indonesia, India, the Taiwanese, the Chinese have started to impose controls on their currency regimes. Many of those things, particularly higher interest rates, serve to crush those domestic economies, making it yet again that much harder to find the money to make the interest payments on their dollar-denominated debt.
You did mention that, for the most part, it seems that this is off the radar of many who are in developed countries. I'm wondering, Eric, if you argue that they should be paying more attention to the strength of the dollar and what it does to emerging markets.
It's one of the reasons that we have the New Economy Forum coming up in Singapore mid-November, because we need to focus the world's attention on these kinds of problems. Of course, it's not the only problem. As you discuss on a daily basis here, there's the problem of climate change and finding a transition to new forms of energy and sustainability and resilience, for that matter, to point to what the president was talking about in Puerto Rico, a huge editorial pillar for us at the New Economy. But it's really hard to take your eyes off the screens at the moment because the charts tell the story.
Yeah, and you do wonder, right, the New Economy Forum, right, coming up in about a month or so, and you do wonder—
6 weeks.
6 weeks.
41 days, I believe.
No pressure there, Eric. But
you know, Eric.
But you do wonder, in a market environment that is so volatile, you do wonder what the conversation will it have changed dramatically, or will it be just more of the same at this point?
Oh, boy.
I mean, it's hard to know.
It's hard to make that kind of a prediction. Sure. One thing is clear, again, if we're comparing today's situation to the one that this world faced in 1985, in spite of what happened during COVID, in spite of what has taken place in supply chains, in spite of the talk of deglobalization, this is a much more globalized world than it was, right, almost 40 years ago. And as a result, whether people want to pay attention to it or don't, the reality is policymakers, at the very least, and the people making decisions at the highest levels of government have to be aware of what's going on in emerging markets. There are unanticipated spillover effects, the kinds of which Lael Brainerd, the vice chair of the Fed, was referring to. I don't know whether she had things like migration on her mind, but that's something that the Europeans have been wrestling with. You know, not just because of war in Ukraine, it's because of war in other countries like Syria, for example. It's because of climate disaster, but it can also be because of economic hardship.
Right, which is a whole other level with this. Well, looking forward to more conversations to come. There are some really big issues, and I know you guys are covering it at the New Economy Forum. Eric Schatzker, he is, of course, the editorial director for Bloomberg New Economy, well known to our Bloomberg audiences, joining us here in our Interactive Broker studio.
Let's get to Charlie Pellet now, who's standing by with a look at the markets, because Charlie Pellet, we got less than a half hour to go.
Indeed, and you look at what I'm looking at on the screen right now, lots and lots of green. Here we are, first trading day of the brand new month. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, water rally surging, with the S&P right now up by 3.1%. Got to stay with us right through the close to see how things shake out, and of course how Asian markets react tonight on Daybreak Asia. Right now the S&P up 110, the Dow looking at a gain of 891 points, up 3.1%. NASDAQ up 295, higher now by 2.8%. The 10-year yield 3.65%, 2-year yield 4.11%. Spot gold surging $37 the ounce, up 2.3%. Bitcoin up 1.6%, 19,550. And crude, West Texas Intermediate up 4.9%, 83.40 for a barrel of WTI. So stocks kicking off the week with big gains after suffering their worst September in 2 decades. Kim Kardashian's going to pay $1.26 million to settle SEC allegations that she broke rules by touting a crypto token without disclosing she was paid for the promotion. Deborah Cunningham is a senior portfolio manager at Federated Investment Management, and this morning on Bloomberg Surveillance, she weighed in with our Tom Keene on that settlement.
Well, first of all, let me tell you, I was completely entertained by the discussion you just had on Kim Kardashian and celebrities advertising and promoting products, especially financial products. Unlike dealing with the National Enquirer, dealing with the SEC is a completely different ballgame, and I think they need to learn that. So thank you for that.
The SEC said Kardashian was paid $250,000 to post on her Instagram account. Blue Apron shares plunging, suffering its biggest intraday drop on record after the meal kit company struck a deal with Canaccord Genuity to sell up to $15 million of stock and reported third-quarter revenue that missed Wall Street estimates. Blue Apron shares right now in the red. Blue Apron down 41.7%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
She's worth over $1 billion or something like that. Kim
I mean,
Kardashian.
there are other
I'm just
people that are,
looking.
like, it depends on if you add up all the Kardashians together. I mean, but some of her sisters are worth more than $1 billion.
Yeah, I mean, they figured it
She's
out.
got her own plane.
Yeah.
It's like a very expensive new plane.
She's got a business that doubled its valuation earlier this year. Yeah.
She's getting into private equity. Did you see that a few weeks ago?
She's figuring it out,
Yeah.
I would say.
Former guy from Carlisle.
Is it?
Yeah.
That's running it?
Yeah, with Kim Kardashian.
All right, the story that keeps on giving. All right, right now, though, speaking of the story that keeps on giving, we have heard from so many Fed speakers. We just talked about it. Deep dive into what's going on with the dollar as a result of Fed policy, monetary policy here in the United States, the implications of. So we wanted to talk a little bit more about a story that's on the Bloomberg and how we are beginning to maybe see cracks or early splintering when it comes to the Fed message. So let's get to it.
We've got Craig Torres with us, Federal Reserve and U.S. economy reporter for Bloomberg News. Craig, this afternoon, joining us on the phone from Washington, D.C. Craig, how far do we have to squint to read between the lines of what all of these Fed speakers have been saying over the last week to actually find any sort of difference when it comes to the speed to peak rates?
Not very far if you know what to look for. So I would say it's best represented by two people right now. On the one hand, Cleveland Fed President Loretta Mester. Loretta thinks this is a very unusual and different environment where we've been above target for months and months. There's no sign of inflation relenting. and sort of shifting down to the gradualism that we saw for many years in Fed policy would be a huge mistake. In her own words, policies has to be asymmetric. In other words, being too tight is less costly than being too loose. On the other side, we heard from Vice Chair, I want to underscore that, Vice Chair Lael Brainerd, and she said, well, let's not forget about lags. We've been running pretty hard here. Maybe it's time to start to be more data dependent and look around. That's kind of where the debate is right now.
All right, so who's more important, mom or dad? No, I'm just kidding. But who's more important? Is it? I'm assuming Lael Brainerd, right? She's the number 2 at the Fed.
Well, you could say that, but remember, what's cool about this, Carol, is markets seem evenly split on this view, right? They have like 2.5 hikes priced in. So they're not, the weighing machine of the market is not giving more credence to one or the other, which I think is good. And second, remember the 2022 dots. We have 8 and 9 in terms of people wanting, how many hikes they want for the rest of the year. Not 8 or 9 hikes, but there's one group that wants a quarter point more than the first group. So, it's a healthy debate. It's interesting.
The debate could shift too, based on the economic data we get this week, namely the change in non-farm payrolls that we see at the end of the week. Analysts surveyed by Bloomberg are still expecting a 265,000 person gain when it comes to those jobs. That's less than last month, fewer than last month, 315K. Does any of this matter, Craig, if we get a blowout number in the jobs report?
I think it matters. One thing that's just stunning is how resilient the U.S. economy is, right? Yeah. It's held up pretty well, and the job market, I think, is being driven by the fact that we're going to be short on a secular basis with regard to labor for a long time, and that story's about long COVID. It's about retirement and reduced immigration flows.
Yeah, right? Like in terms of the longer growth impact, right? What happens on the other side of this and how we recover after this Fed rate cycle, right? That's kind of what you're getting to?
I'm glad you mentioned that because I think everybody listening to us should pay attention to this. Tom Barkin at the Richmond Fed is out with a speech today. We're seeing it in other Fed officials. They're starting to talk about the new secular order, not cyclical. What is the world we're going to have post-COVID? And it may be a world where inflation forces are a bit higher because we don't have abundant energy, globalization is disrupted, and labor supply is more limited.
Carol just put her hands up. I don't know if you saw on YouTube. She just put her hands up she's like, I've been saying this, people.
No. People much smarter than me. But the story that we did on Friday about the Cambridge professor, it was by...
Yeah, it was the Bloomberg opinion piece.
And it basically that the Earth does not have an endless amount of resources. So if we think growth is just going to kind of constantly come from tapping Earth...
Mark Buchanan was our guest on
Mark Buchanan. We're crazy, and we need to rethink. And I agree that I love what you said, this new secular order. Life has got to be different with these big, right, Craig, macro issues, the shift off of fossil fuel, the shift because of the impact of climate change. I mean, look, we're talking about food shortages. I agree, these higher costs that maybe are staying with us. It's different post-pandemic.
Yeah, no, I don't want to be...
Sorry, I'm a little crazy.
No, I don't want to be Malthusian and say, okay, everybody stop having children because the planet's resources are limited. What saved us is technology and innovation, and so but it takes years. That'll take 15 years before we figure out how to get away from carbon, maybe longer. I don't know. But in the near term, I think the big issue for the Fed is labor supply. It just doesn't look like it's coming back. all that. If you look at labor force participation, slow climb.
Right.
You know, and I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
You know, what do you guys think? Is this? Let's not say these are lazy people, okay? I don't like that.
No.
I'm not sure why they're not coming back, but something's going on. What do you guys think?
Craig, I don't know. We scratch our heads, and you're going to have to come back and continue because we've got to unfortunately go off to news. But I agree. I don't know. We scratch our heads constantly when we try to figure out why aren't people coming back to the labor market.
A big thank you to Craig Torres for joining us from Washington, D.C. Let's stay in Washington, D.C. It's a world of national news with Nancy Lyons. Hey, Nance.
Thanks, Tim. President Biden is in Puerto Rico, where he's committing millions to strengthen the island's resilience to flooding.
We have to ensure that when the next hurricane strikes, Puerto Rico is ready. Today, I'm announcing more than $60 million in funding to help coastal areas in Puerto Rico become better prepared for the storm.
The money, which comes from the infrastructure law Biden signed last year. In Florida, more than 600,000 homes remained without power following Hurricane Ian, but Kevin Guthrie, the head of the Florida Division of Emergency Management, says they hope most will have their power within just a few days.
That is a goal that they are trying to hit, to have all customers that can receive power by Sunday of this week. This does not include those areas catastrophically hit where there is absolutely no infrastructure, no homes, and so on.
Guthrie says debris removal will be taking place all week. President Biden is expected to visit Florida to see the devastation on Wednesday. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Nancy Lyons.
Thank you so much, Nancy Lyons in our 99.1 newsroom in Washington, D.C. Hey, we did want to talk a little bit about Peloton, watching this stock in today's trade because this stock is actually up about 7%, staying near its highs of the session.
Sounds like a good gainer for you, Carol.
It is.
Oh, okay, good.
You want to know the funny part of this? It actually hit a 52-week low earlier in the session.
Really?
Yeah.
In today's session, even though?
Yep.
Oh, tells a story, given even that's a 7% gain, right?
Yeah, and it's still down 79% this
Well,
year.
here's why it's higher. We turn to Mark Gurman's story from early this morning. Peloton has inked a deal with Hilton to put bikes in 5,400 hotels here in the U.S. The two companies announcing today that Hilton will be the first chain to offer Peloton bikes across all of its U.S.-branded hotels. The companies also said that members of the Hilton Honors Rewards program will get a 90-day free trial to the digital Peloton app and $100 off a bike, Bike Plus, or a tread purchase through January 1st. The standard Peloton app free trial is 30 days. You know what?
Right.
I wonder if we could get a Peloton for the communal gym in my building, because a little over a year ago, we tried to get one.
Yeah.
And Peloton wouldn't sell one to us. They said, we don't do communal shared Pelotons anymore. And this was at the height of the pandemic, when Peloton was struggling to actually fulfill orders.
Right.
And I'm thinking, wait a second, it's the tables have certainly turned. The company's now struggling to get users and to get those users to keep using these bikes. I wonder if they've shifted their sales strategy.
That's an interesting question because you think about, I don't know how many people in your building, you can have, I don't know how many users on a different bike. I think multiple, like you do wonder, do each of you then pay?
No, I think the building pays a fee and then, everyone shares it and then maybe.
And then just taps into it.
I think so. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm just guessing here.
It's worth a phone call. You do wonder if they'll, move into residential units as a way of, boosting up their user base.
But it would be shared just like it's shared in these hotel gyms.
Yeah, exactly. And if you have people kind of just tapping and using more of the platform, that's a way of expanding its base. In the meantime, it's definitely getting the stock moving. Companies didn't disclose financial terms, did say the deal will include at least one standard Peloton bike per hotel fitness center, and the rollout will start in the coming weeks. So we'll keep an eye on it. You're listening and watching Bloomberg Radio.
updates, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. We're off session highs. Hardly a late-day fade, though. Right now, we have got the Dow holding on to a gain of 810 points, up 2.8%. S&P is rallying 99 points, up 2.8%. NASDAQ up now by 264, up by 2.5%. NASDAQ 100 index full of big tech names, up 2.6%. Russell 2000 advancing now by 2.8%. The 10-year yield 3.66%. The 2-year yield 4.11%. Spot gold is up 2.4%, $16.99 the ounce. Bitcoin up 1.4%, $19,508, while West Texas Intermediate crude is up 4.8%, $83.31 for a barrel of West Texas Intermediate crude. So bottom line here, green on the screen. We've got 12 minutes to go ahead of the close. Stocks kicking off the week with gains after suffering their worst in 2 decades. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thank you so much for that update, Charlie Pellet. It's 3:48 on Wall Street.
The following is an editorial from Bloomberg Opinion.
This editorial was written by the Bloomberg editorial board. Those disheartened by the election campaign run by Giorgia Meloni may think that the best thing about Italy's incoming government will be its likely transience. Hers will be the country's 70th government since World War II. But it would be mistaken to conclude that Italian leaders don't matter. To the contrary, Europe needs a stable Italy, capable of tackling long-festering economic and social problems. But if Meloni wants to achieve anything while in office, she'll have to abandon the retrograde rhetoric that characterized her campaign. The sooner she moves beyond provocations and focuses on delivering stable government and growth, the better her chances of staying relevant and in office. This editorial was written by the Bloomberg editorial board. For more Bloomberg opinion, please go to Bloomberg.com/opinion or OPIN Go on the Bloomberg terminal.
This has been Bloomberg Opinion.
I'm driving in my car. I turn on the radio.
How about you let me drive?
Oh, no. Who's gonna drive you home?
Honey, please, I'll do the driving.
Drive on.
Excuse me, I want to drive.
It's
the question that drives us.
This is the Drive to the Close.
That funky music will drive us till the dawn.
On Bloomberg Radio.
All right, we are counting down to the close on this Monday, the first trading day of the fourth quarter, October 3rd, 2022. And we've just got about 10 minutes left in today's trading session. So let's talk about the markets. Let's get to our Drive to the Close guests.
We got Abe Deshpande with us, the founder and chief investment officer at Centerstone Investors. Abe joins us once again on the phone from New York City. Abe, it's been a while. It's good to have you back with us. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Good. Are we out of the woods? I mean, today's trade certainly seems to think that, investors are pretty happy today.
Yeah, we're picking above the trees today. But if we kind of look back at the starting conditions for 2022, I mean, you had the S&P 500 was, more overvalued versus its intrinsic value since before the global financial crisis. You had fundamentals kind of weakening, and you had the catalyst, which, for many years now has just been monetary policy working against the market and continuing to do so. Right now, with the decline that we've had, valuations obviously it looks better, but the fundamentals are still deteriorating. And despite the optimism from today's economic reports, the monetary policy is likely not to change anytime soon. So I don't know. I'd say we're still in the woods.
Well, especially if you listen to and believe kind of the consensus that we are hearing, from Fed policymakers, despite maybe similarly signs of something like your vice chairman, Lael Brainard, watching kind of some of the broader impacts maybe of the tightening that we're getting here in the United States. But in general, everybody is saying, right, Abe, that, okay, we're going to get higher rates. We're going to get higher rates. That's all we're hearing. And at that point, that's really, truly what the market has.
Higher rates, and of course, no one really knows. Just a little over a year ago that we thought that interest rates were going to stay low for an extended period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And so the next big question mark is when does inflation get to a point where the Fed can stop raising rates or even reverse. And that's, just doesn't look like it's going to happen anytime. I mean, inflation did peak. According to this PCE number that the Fed looks at, inflation peaked in February, and so the core rate. So, I mean, one could argue that, you're having that disinflation. The big question mark is, well, where does it go?
Right.
And so the stickiness of rents and some of these underlying kind of, inflation factors that don't really move that much suggests that, you're going to have a pretty, an interest rate policy that's going to be fairly restrictive for at least another 6 months. But that's just my guess. Like I said, no one really knows.
Hey, listen, we've often talked small cap space with you. I was looking at the Russell 2000, and it is down about 30% from that high back in November 8th of 2021. Our Gina Martin Adams talking a little bit about maybe some more downside, I believe she said, for that space in particular. How do you see the small caps, which are so closely, of course, tied, the Russell 2000, tied to the U.S. domestic economy?
Yeah, it's tied to the domestic economy. It tends to be a little bit more cyclical. There's more banks. There's a lot of banks in there and financials. So it really, I think that it will continue to, soften. I guess the indexes, I don't expect any a huge run up until the U.S. market kind of, shows some signs of stabilization or contradicts the worst case scenarios that people are trying to or seeming to factor in now. And that's the good news, which is that as much, recessions, bear markets, it's just part of the landscape. They happen frequently, and we survive and we get through it. The big, the big event that we don't want to see is a financial crisis. And right now, the banking system is in very good shape in the United States. You have loan loss provisions that are in excess of loan losses, and people are, and here and in Europe. The banking, I guess, executives are taking some precautions now so that there's not such volatility in their earnings and their capital positions. So the fundamentals, as far as the groundwork for a new bull market, are there. You just don't have. I don't think the valuations are quite there yet. And you certainly don't have a catalyst yet. But I don't see a huge collapse or a calamity or anything like that. Like I said, this to me just looks. Partly it's just we're still in the aftershocks of the COVID responses, and beyond that, it looks sort of run-of-the-mill to me.
Interesting. So the people who say this time is different, you say it's not.
Well, it's always different. I mean, this time is very different because we have so many of these external factors that are not related to, just a normal economic cycle, right? I mean, the Federal Reserve at this point, they're correcting for the previous corrections, pilot-induced oscillation. And that can create its own unintended consequences, like it has inflation, for instance. But, the economy, it's a dynamic organism and it's adaptable. And it will adapt to whatever the conditions are, and it'll go beyond that. So but it takes time.
Abe, you said fundamentals are there for a new bull market. We just don't have the catalyst. And what else don't we have?
The valuation. No, in other words, you don't have the situation where, like financial crisis, where you have massive amounts of leverage. You don't have corporations aren't massively leveraged. I mean, they are leveraged, of course, from all the buybacks, but not to a point where they're at major risk. They've distributed their debt maturities across time, so there's not even though interest rates are up right now, it's not going to kill U.S. corporations, and there's certainly going to be some roadkill, but not the entire economy. So the basics are there, and of course you still have fairly strong. If you look at the industrial sector, pretty close to record backlogs and orders. But even if there is a reduction in economic growth, there's a year at least of orders that they have to work through just to get back to like a normal supply demand. You look at cars, look at airplanes, look at boats, like the high ticket items. So that's what I mean by the fundamentals. Like I don't see a oversupply of something. I don't, if anything, you just saw too much demand too quickly. Yeah. And that's what needs to get pulled back a little bit, and that's what's happening. So that to me just looks like an ebb and flow. Granted, the Federal Reserve can always screw things up. They have in the past, right? But but I think there's a way to go for that still.
Abe, just in the last 20 seconds that we have with you, can you give us a place where you have invested during this tumultuous time?
we continue to move offshore. As much as the U.S., the valuations aren't there, the non-U.S. markets, Europe, Asia, the valuations there are approaching another 20% decline or so, which is, it wouldn't be totally surprising, would put those markets at close to 1970s valuations. Wow. You're getting to, if you can look through the next 6 months and the kind of volatility, you're getting to a point where you're able to price in and capture long-term double-digit returns between stock prices and the currency.
All right, we've got to run. Forgive us, but good to check in with you. Abhay Deshpande, founder and chief investment officer of Centerstone Investors, joining us on the phone from New York City.
Beyond the Bell, Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage of the U.S. market close starts right now.
And right now, we are 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day. Romaine Bostic, Caroline Hyde, counting you down to the closing bell. Here to help take us beyond the bell. It's our global simulcast with Carol Massar and Tim Stenovic. We welcome our audiences across Bloomberg Television, radio, as well as on YouTube to parse the crucial moments of the trading day. A trading day that began in the positive, in the green here, and has stayed there all session long here. Looks like we're going to close higher by more than 2%, even though we have seen a little bit of selling here closer to the bells.
Yeah, just rounding around the top here and just coming off of it. But as you said, seeing a lot more enthusiasm certainly in the equity trade today, and that meant the VIX also coming down a little bit, just going down about 1.5 points back to that 30 level, and we've been certainly above 30, closer to 33. We certainly saw that move as of late, but not today.
Hey, we just spoke to Abhay Deshpande, the founder and CIO over at Centerstone Investors, excuse me. He said we're not out of the woods yet. Even though we're seeing some disinflation, it's stickier, especially when it comes to rent and underlying factors that don't move much. And what he thinks is that we're going to have an interest rate from the Fed that's restrictive for at least 6 months at this point. So no sign of a pivot, at least in Abhay Deshpande's view.
And nor from Williams earlier when we heard that Fed voice coming out and saying, look, we are nowhere near done yet. Inflation is still our #1 concern. It didn't budge the market, though. 97% of your S&P is currently in the green. We do still see breadth, whether it be in a day of the green or day of red. And for me, the correlations, once again, the sheer volatility in a bond market that dials back some 26 basis points at one point on the 10-year.
But as far as a broad-based rally goes, I mean, the top 10 stocks that are higher, at least on a percentage basis, they're energy stocks. The top 20 stocks in the S&P 500, well, they're also in the energy and commodity space here. So I'm not sure what that tells us. Apple, Amazon, they did get in on the action today. Tesla, though, having an awful day. You put it all together, though, we're still in the green, wire to wire in the green, with the Dow Jones Industrial Average going to finish the day higher by about 2.7%. The S&P 500 higher by about 2.6%, while the NASDAQ Composite is going to finish the day higher by about 2.3%. And we saw a lot of activity in a lot of those cyclical names. The Russell 2000 finishing higher by about 2.7%, Carol, and Dow Transport's up more than 3%.
No, and you mentioned all those energy names. They really were the standouts, topping the S&P 500. A big reason why you saw energy prices move up almost 5% here, settling with a big gain on expectations, Caroline, of maybe an OPEC plus cut, but and that really pushed up the equity space as well.
It did. Let's break this all down from an industry perspective, because as we said, basically every industry group was in the green. Dialing up, though, once again, as you mentioned, was the energy overall. And in fact, 100% of all the names on the S&P 500 were in the green for the likes of the energy trade. We are seeing other industry groups on the high side. I mean, there was only one tiny speck of red, which of course speaks to the Tesla downside, the autos, the composites there. Even though GM, some of the names having a really good day, we are starting to see some concern about demand side for Tesla, even though Elon Musk still tries to persuade the supply side. Sorry, I'm probably stepping on people's movers, but I'm looking overall at...
That's okay, really, I do it all the time.
You are forgiven, Caroline.
Thank you. Utilities on the high side, communication services on the upside, really, healthcare. I mean, every single real estate company, interestingly, in the green, even though we do still see those worries about the housing market, Carol.
Caroline, you are forgiven. Remain, however, you are not. Stop it. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. All right, so Remain talked about energy names. They certainly were the outperformers. Marathon Oil, in fact, was the #1 gainer in the S&P 500 with a gain of more than 10% in today's session. We've talked about it here on Bloomberg, of course. The price of oil also bounced higher. This is OPEC Plus is rumored to be considering an approximately 1 million barrel per day oil production cut. So keep in mind, something like Marathon Oil, it's up 50% this year. Peloton, we've talked about it. Caroline, Remain, everybody on their Pelotons. Remain, do you have a Peloton?
I don't. I kind of buck this trend. I live in New York City. I don't have a mansion out in wherever you live in Greenwich, Connecticut. But it's like, where are we going to put the Peloton? It's like, I don't know. So thankfully we bucked that.
I love the stories, the tales you tell, Romaine. All right, Peloton up 7.8% in today's session. It did hit a low today, so go figure that after or before it rallied. We know the Hilton deal, they're going to put it in all of their hotels here in the United States. Stock is still down about 80%, and about 11% of the float is shorted. And then live
$7.47. That's your closing price here.
It's up 54 cents, right? A little perspective?
Well, yeah, a little perspective for a stock, of course. What are they IPO at? Something like $29, $30?
Yeah, times change. Livewire, I just want to mention this, a $1.8 billion market cap. I like this. This is Harley Davidson's e-bike spinoff.
Oh, they finally rose.
Yeah, I know. It rebounded. The SPAC went IPO through a SPAC merger last week, but it finally rallied. Check this out. Up 29%, up as much as 46% earlier in the session. So quite a bounce in today's session after.
So that's back to basically the SPAC deal price, which, why did it sell off in the first place?
I don't know. It was just disappointing. I don't know. Maybe if you bought one. Maybe if you bought one.
I don't know. I'll ask Matt Miller. I'm sure Matt Miller's got one.
I don't know. Would he want?
He's got the mansion in the suburbs.
He would want like an original hog. I think he has a couple of those anyway. That's a Harley Davidson ticker, HOG.
Thanks for letting us know.
That's like the best ticker.
Thanks for talking
around. Okay. Well, speaking of
is that mansplaining
bikes,
a little bit there?
That's called Timsplaining. Okay, Timsplaining. Hey, I'll Timsplain Tesla a little bit. We heard from Caroline and Romaine already, but it's weighing down the S&P 500 today, down 8.6%. It had its worst day since June. Quarterly deliveries disappointed. Ed Ludlow came on our program a little earlier, and he explained a little bit of the nuance here. At least what Tesla is saying. They're saying the cars are built, they're manufactured, they just haven't been delivered yet because of shipping delays from its 4 facilities, 2 in the U.S., 1 in Berlin, and 1, of course, in Shanghai as well. Tesla shares trading at their lowest level since July, I should say. Carnival, remember last week, Carnival shares fell 17% in just a week? Well, its decline continues, down 2.6% today. Last week, it did report those occupancy numbers that missed estimates. Now, today, it got a stock price target cut from analysts at Credit Suisse, Citi, Stifel, Susquehanna. And then its bonds fell to a record low today as well. Carnival shares down.
They borrowed a lot of money during the pandemic. So when we talk about higher borrowing costs going forward, you do wonder.
There's some serious concerns about the recovery, too, when it comes to the cruise lines as well. And then Blue Apron finishing it down by 45%. The company did come out with some numbers today. Third quarter revenue missed Wall Street estimates. It also struck a deal with Canaccord Genuity to sell up to 15 million in shares of stock. Down more than 50% this year, but I actually covered the IPO back in 2017. They IPO'd at $10 a share. But then a couple years later, they did this 15-to-1 reverse stock split. So the $3.16 share that you see today is not at all equivalent to like a decline in, from $10. This is a stock that's down 97% from its IPO.
Meanwhile, let's move across from some of the food inflation that I'm sure that Blue Apron does suffer. Let's look at what's happening in terms of your commodities space, because we did get, of course, the energy names going high because oil was trading high, almost 5% on WTI crude, similar moves up more than 4% for Brent because, well, maybe OPEC Plus are going to get together and start winding back production once again to the tune of 1 million barrels a day. This, of course, is they're worried about some of the demand side coming from China, coming from overall economies as we see a slowdown. We saw natural gas pull back somewhat, particularly in the UK and Europe, down by 15%, 10% overall in terms of the contracts there, even though we still do see those tensions and concerns remaining regarding Ukraine and Russia. You flip it over to what's happening in the FX space, because this was, for once, a story of dollar weakness on the day. Norwegian krone gets pitched up, strengthening by 2% because of oil. Metals help New Zealand, Aussie dollar get on the high side. The loonie goes higher. British pound at 1.3%. That as we, of course, see a dialing back, a U-turn coming from the UK government in terms of tax cuts for the very wealthy, well, not very wealthy, but the higher income brackets. And meanwhile, I'm looking at sovereign bonds just across the board. Italy, UK gilts, Portuguese debt, a rally upon our hands, bright green for our radio audience.
And it's kind of interesting to see what's being priced in. You talk about that rally that we saw in the sovereign debt market. I don't even know how to explain this. I mean, you go back to sort of about 10 a.m. U.S. time when we got that ISM manufacturing data, which actually showed a contraction in a couple of those key levels, particularly when it comes to new orders as well as the employment picture. And then you just saw yield just spike. I mean, something like 30 basis points on the 5-year. Now that did sort of right-size itself somewhat, but still down about 19, 20 basis points here on the day. And that's a similar story, similar moves that we saw along other parts of the curve. 16 basis points on your 2-year and about 18 on the 10-year, guys. And I guess, is this people basically calling the Fed's bluff, saying that we finally reached the peak in yields?
I don't know. Time will tell. Can we talk Kim Kardashian?
That was the second question I asked you that you dodged.
Time will
I'm
tell.
good at that.
Time will tell, and eventually you might get an SEC fine.
I mean, this is interesting, right? This is that she was paid, right, to talk about a certain crypto token or whatever.
$150,000 for one Instagram.
I know, but she didn't talk about it, right? And she's putting it out there, and there are people who are reading it. So this is the SEC saying you can't do that.
She did include #ad at the bottom, but the SEC still said it wasn't clear that she was being paid to pitch it. So what does it mean?
Was #ad that was not written into the regulations? Did they not have that foresight?
I mean, it's kind of a fuzzy new world, right? Because it is, regulators are still trying to figure out what celebrities can do in terms of the legality around promoting things.
No, is it fuzzy that if you're talking up a product that you need to be told and totally transparent that you are
#ad there?
No.
It's not fuzzy, though. I mean, in all seriousness, the fuzziness, yeah, it may be their world, but there's a world of finance that existed before Kim Kardashian and the other Ks came along, and that world isn't fuzzy. You have disclosures that you have to make, and if you don't do them, well, the SEC will come and give you a very affordable fine.
It's one thing promoting makeup, promoting Fire Island tickets, but it's a very different thing promoting securities.
Yeah, exactly, right? And you bring in a whole bunch, another layer of regulators. All right, we got Kim K in. My day is complete. All right, we got to
Did we get the
Have we reached out to her for an interview? Yeah, what's Kanye's response?
Yeah,
he was he wasn't pleased.
Yeah.
I bet. For a lot of reasons, probably. All right, we got to run. All right,
Is he ever happy?
Oh, Romaine, we're so glad you're back. All right, we got to run. We will see you same time, same place tomorrow for Beyond the Bell on radio, TV, and YouTube.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Bloomberg Quick Takes Tim Stenovic on Bloomberg Radio.
No, I think it's an important issue, and I think if you're not clear on social, just speaking Kim K, like if you're not aware that that means she's being paid, you know how that stuff can slide in.
I know, $1.3 million. Where's she going to find the money? You're
my
listening to
gosh.
Bloomberg.
All right, now let's get back to world and national news for that. It's back to Nancy Lyons in D.C. Hey, Nance.
Hey, Carol. President Biden says it's important to make Puerto Rico more resilient. He's in the U.S. territory today and committing an additional $60 million in aid from the infrastructure law to help Puerto Rico rebuild following a massive hit from Hurricane Fiona last month.
I mean, rebuild it all, and rebuild it in a resilient way. So you don't, when storms come again, which they will, they're not having the damage they caused before.
Biden applauded the crews that have restored power to 90% of the island's nearly 1.5 million customers. Well, 5 days after Hurricane Ian slammed into Florida, crews still say they're finding victims in the storm. The death toll on the low end is 68. On the high end, over 100. The state's emergency management director, Kevin Guthrie, says crews are now working to restore power.
For those that can receive power, the estimates are that they will have restoration done by Sunday.
Guthrie says more than 600,000 Floridians are still without any electricity. Insurance appraisers say insured losses have risen to as much as $57 billion. President Biden will be traveling to Florida on Wednesday. The Supreme Court is back in session and refusing to expand gun rights. The High Court has declined to hear a challenge to banning bump stocks, which allow semi-automatic rifles to fire faster. But the justices today did hear arguments concerning the EPA's authority to police some kinds of water pollution. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Nancy Lyons.
Thank you so much, Nancy Lyons in our 99.1 newsroom in Washington, D.C. Carol Masser, along with Tim Stenovic, live in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio, streaming on YouTube. Hey, a story by our David Baker and Hadriana Lowenkron about Manhattan's EV charging sites now actually outnumber gas stations.
Yeah, this is pretty cool. I mean, they're apples and oranges a little bit here. Yeah. Okay, so we'll break it down.
There's not a lot of gas stations, I feel like, in Manhattan.
No, but every gas station has, what, X number of pumps?
Yeah.
And how long does it take to fill up a car versus charge a car? So that's what I'm saying. When you know, it's not total apples to oranges, but I think it's symbolic of something that's really big. So the borough, Manhattan, we're talking about, has 320 about publicly accessible charging locations. That's according to data from the U.S. Department of Energy, compared to with just 29 remaining gas stations. That's according to the New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets. By the way, here's a pro tip. If you want to fill up with gas,
Yeah.
try not to do it in Manhattan because it's very expensive.
That's why all the cabbies used to go to like New Jersey. I think they still do, or just like when they're
No,
on
not
it at a
anymore
time-
because the taxes are high there again.
Oh, are they?
Yeah, New Jersey used to be the place to fill up with gas for everyone. We'd always stop in New Jersey, but then a few years ago, the gas tax went
Is it
went
still?
higher.
It's still?
It's still it's like just as expensive as it is in Brooklyn.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
All right. So going back to the EV charging sites versus gas stations. So Manhattan's EV charging sites now outnumber its gas stations more than 10 to 1. Gas stations still dominate citywide, 697 across all 5 boroughs versus about 520 charging sites. But there, too, the chargers are catching up. You know, this is the thing we talk about. You want to have EVs, you got to have charging sites.
The most immediate reason for Manhattan's gas station scarcity, it has nothing to do with EVs. Land on the island is just too valuable to waste on a business that's minimally profitable and needs a convenience store or a car wash to survive. One by one, though, the borough's gas stations have been bulldozed to make way for condos and offices.
They used to be on the West Side Highway. You would
They
see
did,
them
yeah.
way over there. Like if you needed gas, you just go to the West
Car
Side.
washes, too.
But increasingly, that all of that land has been developed, and you see residential high-rises that have popped up.
There's a gas station for sale in my neighborhood for like $28 million or something.
Because the property,
Yeah.
because somebody's going to do it, level
Exactly,
it,
build
and then
condos. It's crazy.
Our world. This is Bloomberg Radio.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Stocks rose from the ashes. Best day since July. Stocks kicking off the week with big gains after having their worst September in 2 decades. S&P was up 92 points, did finish off session highs, but still a gain today of 2.6%. Dow Industrial is up 765 points, a gain there of 2.7%. NASDAQ was up 239. That was a gain today of 2.3%. The 10-year yield 3.64% on the 10-year. The 2-year yield 4.11%. Gold rallied 2.4% today, up $39 the ounce to $16.9987, while Bitcoin was up 1.7%, 19,558 on Bitcoin, and West Texas Intermediate crude up 4.7%, 83.20 for a barrel of WTI. So again, best day since July for the U.S. stock market. S&P up 92, a gain there of 2.7%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Well, there's a story on the Bloomberg today about how climate change made Hurricane Ian's most extreme rainfall about 10% worse than it would have been without 2 centuries of greenhouse gas pollution. This is according to a first take analysis of the storm by 2 U.S. climate researchers. Their rapid analysis, which they shared on Twitter, looked only at rainfall and not other critical climate metrics related to hurricanes, such as strength, intensification, sea level rise. But, you know, we know that these storms may be not more frequent, but their intensity has definitely ramped up because of climate change.
And that's something that we obviously need to think about.
Right.
We've got somebody with us who thinks about this stuff a lot. Jason Few is CEO of Fuel Cell Energy. It's a publicly traded company. He joins us this afternoon on the phone from Danbury, Connecticut. Jason, how are you?
I am good. Thank you very much. How are you doing, Tim?
We're doing pretty well. Can you explain how fuel cells work? Because I think a lot of people who, you know, we understand batteries, we understand internal combustion, but fuel cells, it's something that I think is not necessarily on all of our radar. It's certainly not on mine.
Sure. So I think if you think about it in its most simple terms, and we just use batteries as an analogy, you know, batteries, you put energy in, and then you drain it, and then you need to recharge the battery. The way you can think about a fuel cell is that we use an input feedstock for the fuel cell, and that allows the fuel cell to run and operate on a continual basis, you know, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, without the need to recharge the battery. And because it's a fuel cell, it actually uses a chemical reaction to actually take a fuel and air and effectively make hydrogen, and then to use that hydrogen to produce power. And so it works very different than a traditional combustion engine that, you know, takes and basically combusts the fuel. With a fuel cell, the fuel is not combusted, so you don't produce things like SOx and NOx and other particulates that play very heavily on, you know, climate as well as air quality.
What are the byproducts that it does end up releasing, that it does produce?
So it really depends on what is the actual feedstock that you're using. So in a case where, you know, we're working to commercialize our solid oxide fuel cell, and in that case, we could use 100% hydrogen. And that hydrogen could be made from all renewable energy sources. So in that case, there are no byproducts that are produced other than water, you know, from the hydrogen. The second way, if we're using a traditional fuel, let's say a biofuel or renewable natural gas, or even natural gas, then the byproduct is you do have some carbon emissions, but if you're using biofuels or RNG, right, that's considered carbon neutral. And again, there's no combustion of the fuel. And then we also have the ability to do things like carbon capture, or what we refer to as well as carbon separation, to significantly reduce or eliminate those carbon emissions. And when you think about it in total, when you look at fuel cells versus renewable energy sources, let's say like wind and solar, because the fuel cells are more efficient and they run 24/7, and you think about just overall avoided emissions, because you know you actually end up with greater emission reductions with fuel cells in most cases than you do when you're using renewable energy, because you may only be getting getting 25 to 35% efficiency from those resources, and then you need to get power from somewhere else.
So, you know, it's interesting. We all have a lot of conversations about what is ultimately the solution to climate change, and as we move towards an alternative energy, world, if you will. And hydrogen it feels like there's momentum building in general. But talk to us about some of the concerns when it comes to fuel cells. And some of it is the cost, the durability. Some of it is concerns about flammability of the fuel. So what is it, the nut that you feel like we still have to crack before we get kind of mass adoption?
Well, that's a great question. And at Fuel Cell Energy, we do two things as a company. We decarbonize power and we produce hydrogen. Those are the two things we do with our platform technology. When you think about some of those concerns or areas that you raised, we've had commercial available products since 2003. And in fact, our first commercial fuel cell was sold actually in Japan to the Kiernan Beer Company using biofuels. So, it just shows the fuel flexibility of the platform. When it comes to hydrogen and some of the concerns that, get raised around hydrogen, hydrogen is used widely, around the world. 90 million metric tons a year of hydrogen are used. There's some forecasts that suggest that, 20% of the world's energy will ultimately come from hydrogen, if not greater than that. We tend to think that hydrogen is going to be an important part of the solution, the same way we think carbon capture will be an important part of the solution to achieving the 1.5 degree scenario in terms of climate change itself. And from a safety standpoint, like I said, hydrogen widely used today. It's very safe. And unlike a battery, which contains everything that you need inside the battery to actually start a fire, that's not the case with hydrogen. So it's actually quite safe.
So why isn't adoption more widespread? Why will it maybe only be 20% of energy production in the years to come? Why not more?
Well, I think part of it is there's a cost question, right, in terms of this desire to have green hydrogen. One of the things that I'm really excited about is the move not only in the United States, but I'm seeing in countries around the world in the conversations we're having, and in a conversation I actually just got to participate in Pittsburgh with Secretary Granholm and energy ministers from around the world at a CEO Hydrogen Roundtable. The conversation has shifted from using colors to really talk about carbon intensity. And I think that's one big change that's going to help drive accelerated adoption. Another change or thing that's happening that's going to help drive adoption is the work that you're seeing that's going to get done as a result of the IRA in the United States. You have similar legislation in markets like Korea and Japan and across the EU. And we've seen this movie play out before. We saw how incentives, whether it's ITC, production tax credits, those kind of things really help drive the cost curve down. We're going to see that same thing happen with fuel cells and with hydrogen as an effective way to get us to the cost that everyone's targeting, which is, as low as $1 a kilogram for hydrogen, and that's going to make it highly competitive. And I think as you look around the world today, and you're seeing increased energy prices, those spark spreads are narrowing, and so I think you're going to see adoption start to accelerate with hydrogen as one of the answers to solving this climate crisis we have today.
From an infrastructure perspective, when it comes to generating power, explain to us how you take a facility and allow it to create power using hydrogen, using fuel cells versus using fossil fuels.
Yeah. So when you think about an input fuel, and you think about hydrogen, hydrogen just becomes the input fuel that we would be using with our solid oxide platform, for instance, in which we would take that hydrogen and we use that hydrogen as the feedstock to create electricity. That hydrogen interacts with the fuel cell, right, and the chemistry that we use, in this case, a solid oxide technology, to produce that power. And if that hydrogen was produced by, a zero carbon source of electricity, let's say you're using electrolysis, so you're taking electricity and water and you're converting it to hydrogen, then you're using using that hydrogen to produce power, that hydrogen has zero carbon intensity, then the power being produced from our platform is zero carbon. But we also have the ability to use blended hydrogen and natural gas, for example, which even lowers, the carbon intensity of the fuel in that case. But in all cases, whether it's hydrogen, renewable natural gas, or biofuels, that serves as the input fuel that the fuel cell needs to then convert that to power, whether it's for the grid or for a commercial and industrial customer, in delivering that power as a product.
Hey, I'm curious, Jason, about the business and the business outlook and the growth. And I know earlier this month you came out with your latest update, quarterly update. I think there was a wider than expected loss for the quarter, strongest quarterly revenue in 5 years. And you guys talked about an increase in marketing and consulting costs because you had raised headcount for rebranding and accelerating your sales and commercialization efforts. Give us some more color, if you will, in terms of the business, who's buying. You guys have customers certainly in the energy space, in the corporate space, but give us an idea of where the growth is coming from your business.
Sure. So the customers that we target largely cut across the utility sector, where we're providing grid-based power, and we might be providing that power purely as just a power resource on the grid, or we might be providing that power and using the thermal energy where we might be connected to a district heating system and we're providing that thermal energy in addition to the power. Or we might be in a microgrid configuration where we're providing power to the grid, and in a power outage, we go into what we refer to as island mode, and we provide power to a dedicated set of resources, keeping those critical resources powered while the grid is down. We also serve commercial and industrial customers, and in many of those cases, we're providing power to those customers. And again, we might be providing the thermal energy such that they're using steam from our platform in their manufacturing process. And we also have the ability to do things like provide carbon to those customers. So when you think about carbonated beverage companies, or you think about food processing, where carbon is really important to not only processing proteins, but then extending shelf life by keeping those proteins chilled. Those are all ways in which we leverage our platform to deliver value to our customers, in addition to hydrogen. And we're building a project for Toyota today where we'll deliver hydrogen to Toyota, power and water, all from the same platform at the Port of Long Beach in California.
Hey, go ahead. A very quick question. I just want to know about price increases, Jason, when it comes to the commodities that you actually use. Are you seeing the prices come down at all?
We are seeing different reactions to different commodities. So, for example, if you take nickel as a commodity, we've seen price decreases there. We're seeing, obviously, price increases for natural gas. So as we look across our supply chain, we've had a very focused approach on managing those price increases to minimize the impacts for us in terms of pricing to our customers. But we are seeing some price improvements across the supply chain.
Well, really great to check in with you and really appreciate your time, Jason. Take care. Jason Few, Chief Executive Officer at Fuel Cell Energy. They are a $1.4 billion market cap company, and great to have them join us from, I believe, their corporate offices in Connecticut.
Let's get a check of the latest when it comes to the market. Standing by, we got Charlie.
Thank you very much, Tim. Here's what's going on. Green on the screen. Big move higher. First trading day of the month of October. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all rallying today. Big gains there after suffering their worst September in 2 decades. Treasury yields halted a seemingly endless surge. Weak manufacturing data in the U.S. soothed concern that the Fed will over-tighten monetary policy. So here's how things finished. We did end off session highs, but still a 92-point gain today for the S&P, up 2.6%. Dow Jones Industrial Average up today by 765 points, up by 2.7%. NASDAQ up today by 239 points, up 2.3%. 10-year yield to 3.64%. The 2-year yield 4.11%. Spot gold $16.99.59 the ounce, up 2.4%. While West Texas Intermediate crude today up 4.8%, $83.27 a barrel. As for the market backdrop, Abhay Deshpande is Chief Investment Officer at Centerstone. He was our guest right here on Bloomberg Business Week.
The fundamentals as far as the groundwork for a new bull market are there. You just don't have, I don't think the valuations are quite there yet. And you certainly don't have a catalyst yet. But I don't see a huge collapse or a calamity or anything like that. Like I said, this to me just looks, partly it's just we're still in the aftershocks of the COVID responses. And beyond that, it looks sort of run-of-the-mill to me.
Fans of Peloton Interactive will have a new place to ride the company's workout bikes. Hilton Worldwide Holdings, 5,400 hotels in the United States. Peloton shares on that news up 7.8% today. Hilton Worldwide advanced by 1%. Recapping the Dow, the S&P and NASDAQ, best day for the S&P since July. S&P today up by 92 points, up 2.6%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. You are listening and watching Bloomberg Business Week on this Monday. And we talked about earlier how we buried the lead at the top of the show because Kim Kardashian, it is among the most read stories.
Breaking news.
We talked about it with our TV colleagues recently about her $1.3 million SEC fine. We also know the chairman of the SEC weighed in on it earlier, but we'll get to that in just a moment. In the meantime, we want to talk to our own Scarlet Fu.
She is a Bloomberg Business of Sports host. You also know her as a Bloomberg Quick Take correspondent. She's with us right now in the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. Scar, what do we need to know about this fine? Because, I hear $1.3 million in the context of any Kardashian, and I think to myself, that's like the change. That's like the change they find in the couch.
Well, yes, and she also did not admit or deny any wrongdoing.
But she paid
here.
up.
She did pay up, and she's cooperating with the SEC. What's significant here is that she got paid $250,000 by Ethereum and Max to tout EMAX tokens, and so this fine is 5 times what she got paid. So it's significant in that regard.
Wait, I have a question for both of you right now.
Please.
Had you heard of this token before?
No. Have you?
Carol, had you?
No.
I hadn't either, so I'm thinking to myself, this was not money well spent. Because we didn't even hear about this.
That's a good point. And she posted this on Instagram to her many millions of followers. But what's interesting here is
That's a big SPAC. Go back to that. You said she was paid
$250,000.
And she's now paying a fine of 1.3.
1.26 million.
Right.
So 5 times the amount she got paid.
Okay.
But what's interesting, when I talked to Bloomberg Intelligence's senior policy analyst, Nathan Dean, about this, is the way that the SEC made this announcement. Because they often will penalize someone or accuse someone of touting something like a cryptocurrency and announce these enforcement actions on their Twitter feed. But they did this with a lot of splash. They did it on a Monday morning before the market opened. They had like a splashier than usual Twitter post with a video on YouTube that went along with it explaining why investors need to be protected. So they kind of went out of their way.
Interesting.
Okay, but there's a distinction here I think that's important. This was, she was pushing a security. Or what, I don't know, actually.
I mean, it wasn't a lip liner or something
exactly,
like that?
and I think, Caroline made that point on our simulcast earlier, and I think it's an important distinction, right? Because she's not, we see, I don't know, depending on who you guys follow on Instagram, but it's like anyone who has a following of like 20 or 30,000 or more can participate in these programs where, they're essentially being paid to post something. And at the end, they say #ad.
Well, she did do #ad, I believe, but she needed to say that she was being paid for this promotion, and that's what was missing here. Gary Gensler is all about transparency and disclosure, especially when it comes to crypto assets. And you mentioned a good thing, an important point, which is it a security? Is it not a security?
Yeah.
Because Bitcoin and Ether, are not securities. They're commodities. But these other digital assets, the SEC argues, are securities, which means it falls under the SEC's purview. I know, we're getting really technical here.
My brain hurts. No, but it's interesting, especially when you start to get into, people will follow, celebrities who are touting certain financial investments, and you want to make sure the disclosures are very, very clear.
And that's what Gary Gensler is saying they're doing by making sure that celebrity pitchmen and pitchwomen know that they are influencing investors, ordinary investors who may not have all the information that others do, the sophisticated investors, they need to make really clear, hey, by the way, I'm getting paid for this. So, you move forward, be careful, and, move forward with caution.
Okay, another important distinction here. We're not talking the Matt Damon, did he do Crypto.com? I don't remember which ad he did.
Yeah, for an exchange.
Larry David during the Super Bowl, all these celebrities. That was completely different than what the SEC alleges that Kim Kardashian did.
Yes, that was different because, I think we get really technical here, and I wouldn't be surprised if lawsuits start popping up with all of this because we've already seen lawsuits with the SEC versus Ripple, but what the SEC is alleging here is that all she needed to do was say that she was paid to promote this. And I think if you look at an ad with Matt Damon, it'll be clear that he was paid to promote something. So when she posted on Instagram, maybe made it look like, hey, a friend told me about this. Just wanted you to know.
Right. I feel like social is such a weird space, right?
It's the lines are blurred.
Yes.
And people play on that.
Exactly. And I am curious about the momentum that this token got as a result. I don't know if we know that or,
Yeah, no, it did get a bit of a pop after she published her post, and then it continued to fall.
Yeah.
So it's not as if this was a sound investment if people were investing in it.
So the big question is, what does this mean moving forward for the SEC and for celebrities endorsing things? Crypto may not be so hot right now.
This was definitely a shot across the bow from the SEC, from Gary Gensler. It was a sign that the SEC intends to crack down on crypto. And what Nathan Dean of BI told me is that what Gary Gensler is saying to the crypto world is, you need to come in and register. You need to register as an exchange or a broker, and then we can move forward. But the crypto world is very resistant to doing that. They feel that today's regulations do not work for the crypto, which is decentralized. Bitcoin and Ether are commodities. That's a done deal. We're not securities either, so we shouldn't have to play by these rules. And in fact, we should be treated as commodities where enforcement is a different beast completely.
It's the wild, wild west. And we see regulators continuing to try and figure this out, right? And you just want to make sure.
And it's a mess because you look all over the world and it's just as patchworky as it is here.
Kim K. Think she had a bad day because of this?
No, I don't think $1.3 million matters at all.
Her lawyer said that she's cooperating and they're doing everything they can to move forward.
I'm not a lawyer.
Yeah.
But
I feel like we need to be when we talk about this.
No,
I need to disclaim it that I'm not a lawyer.
No, absolutely.
So
and there's a responsibility to people, especially when you talk about any kind of investment, right? Or investment.
Yeah. Again, Matt Damon, clear that he got paid, right?
Yeah. All right. I can't talk enough about Kim K. Scarlett Fu, thank you so much. Bloomberg Business of Sports, host on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Quick Take correspondent and anchor here in our studio.
Let's get to world and national news in Washington, D.C. with Nancy Lyons. Hey, Nance.
Thanks, Tim. President Biden has been surveying the damage in Puerto Rico from Hurricane Fiona and assuring officials there that they'll receive every dollar promised.
Fiona hit when Puerto Rico was far from rebuilt from the damage of Hurricane Maria 5 years ago.
All of America is with you as you recover and rebuild it in a resilient way. So you don't, when storms come again, which they will, they're not having the damage they caused before.
The president said federal money would pay the entire cost of clearing debris, search and rescue, and emergency shelter, and then shore up coastal areas, modernize the electric grid, and improve roads. In Washington, Irv Chapman, Bloomberg Radio.
Officials in Florida say search and rescue teams are still looking for victims from Hurricane Ian. And Lee County Sheriff Carmine Marcino says they're also targeting looters.
You go in that house, you're going to be carried out. I want to be very clear about that. We have law and order.
Sheriff Carmine Marcino. Ukraine is unleashing a renewed counteroffensive in the southern Kherson region, and U.S. National Security Council spokesman John Kirby tells Bloomberg additional U.S. assistance is likely.
We are in lockstep with them, talking to them almost every day. As a matter of fact, Secretary Austin spoke with the defense minister of Ukraine, Minister Reznikov, just about a day and a half ago. They discussed additional security assistance. So I think you're going to see us continue to provide them the kinds of weapons and capabilities that are well suited to the fight that they're in.
Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts.
All right, Nancy, thank you so much. Nancy Lyons in our D.C. newsroom. So one story we wanted to bring to your attention, it's among the most read on the Bloomberg in the past 8 hours, from our Hema Parmar, who covers the hedge fund industry, and she talks about the first woman to launch a $1 billion hedge fund. Divya Natimi starting her own hedge fund today with more than $1 billion of commitments, making it the largest launch of a woman-led firm in the industry's history and making it the biggest of any to debut this year in what has been, as we know, a very volatile market environment.
Yeah, Avala Global has begun investing the majority of the cash, with the rest expected to arrive early in the first quarter. That's according to people familiar with the matter, who asked not to be identified because the fund's inception hasn't been announced publicly. We should note a representative for the New York-based firm declined to comment.
Yeah, she's a portfolio manager. She oversaw more than $4 billion at Andreas Halverson's Viking Global Investors before leaving last year. She's going to bet on and against stocks in the consumer, business services, and technology, media, and telecom sectors, while also backing private companies, according to those in the know. The money gathered so far doesn't include investments from Viking clients because anti-competitive competition agreements prohibit her from soliciting them until November, which is probably pretty normal.
Yeah, she joins a growing list, though, of Viking alumni who've set out on their own in recent years. The most prominent among them, of course, Dan Sundheim, who stepped down as chief investment officer to found D1 Capital Partners. That was back in 2018, and he's built it into a $22 billion behemoth. In 2020, former Viking co-CIOs Ben Jacobs and Tom Purcell started Anomaly Capital Management and Alua Capital Management, respectively. And then you got Grant Wonders, former Viking portfolio manager, launching Voyager Global Management, too.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. We know it's been a volatile market, and we've talked about IPOs in the U.S. slowing down. We've just talked about the market environment overall slowing down, whether it's deal activity and so on and so forth. And launching a fund into this environment is never easy, but she seems to have done it.
Yeah, this is really interesting. The clients are going to face some constraints. They won't be able to pull their cash for the first 2 years, and if they choose to do so after, it'll take an additional 2 years for them to withdraw all of their capital.
And we often maybe see that with a lot of hedge funds in terms of some of the rules. All right, you're listening and watching Bloomberg Radio.
updates, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. U.S. stocks rise from the ashes in the best day since July, with the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all surging today. While we did finish off session highs, we did see the S&P advance 92 points, up 2.6%. The stock market kicked off the week with big gains after suffering their worst September in 2 decades. The Dow today up 765, up 2.7%. NASDAQ Composite Index up 239, up 2.4%. 10-year yield 3.64%. 2-year yield 4.11%. Spot gold up 2.3%. $16.98 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude up 4.7%. $83.26 a barrel on West Texas Intermediate crude. Federal Reserve Bank of New York President John Williams says the U.S. Central Bank has yet to raise rates to levels that are restricting economic growth, and tightening still has significant ways to go. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, thank you so much, Charlie Pellet there with that Bloomberg Business News Flash. Well, at the start of the year, Bloomberg reported on how the global cloud computing market is expected to reach approximately $1.5 trillion by 2030, so growing at a compound annual growth rate of nearly 16%. This is according to a study by Grandview Research.
We're really pleased to have with us this afternoon Hillary Hunter, Chief Technology Officer at IBM Cloud. Hillary joins us via Zoom from New York City this afternoon. Hillary, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for joining us. Hey, before we get into the nitty-gritty of this report that you guys did with Harris Poll, which I think is really interesting, I want to get an idea of the landscape right now, because Carol and I talk a lot about, cloud spending and tech spending, and I'm wondering, is the volatility that companies are facing, higher input costs, is that right now affecting their cloud spending?
Yeah, I think it's driving a really important conversation that relates to this poll we're going to talk about, which is really looking for value stream generation out of a cloud transformation. Folks are looking, because of the factors you indicated, to do something other than just stick the website on a cloud or run the HR application on the cloud. They're looking for, where can cloud actually help me address elasticity and grow my business faster and save costs? And that has to do with moving more substantive pieces of a business to the cloud.
So, it's interesting, and I just want to kind of push a little bit on Hillary, if I can, on what Tim asked, because I think one of the things we're trying to figure out where this global economy goes next is, technology spending so important to companies because they have to. And also it's a great way in terms of productivity gain. So are you seeing, though, before we get a little bit deeper into this report, are you guys seeing any slowdown or pushback when it comes to companies and their willingness to spend on anything and everything to do with the cloud?
Yeah, actually, we continue to see strong growth in cloud consumption because it is that part of transformation. It's a part of being able to change a business, reach more customers. And so actually, I think in most cases, it can actually be a solution to those types of optimizations and cost savings that enterprises are looking to find these days.
So interesting. I mean, is it seen as essential rather than discretionary?
Yeah, you spend to keep the lights on. You spend to address, in a regulated industry, what the regulators need you to do, and you spend to continue to run your business efficiently, find opportunities for automation and other things like that. And so it really is critical to continue to modernize IT in order to be able to address times like these.
When it comes to security, though, I think there is, as we've seen some really massive security lapses globally over the last few years, how much is being maybe pulled off the cloud and rather being kept more close to home? What are you seeing between that mix of up in the cloud versus, on home territory and your own kind of hardware?
Yeah, it's such an important question, and it's actually relates to this poll that we just put out, this transformation index, because over 70% of participants and respondents to this poll said that hybrid cloud, which is actually a little bit different than how you just maybe accidentally describe cloud. A lot of people think of cloud as this place that you have to move things to, and that can sometimes be scary. We need to really seriously think about the security, the compliance, the data privacy, data protection in that place when you're moving things to a cloud. But hybrid cloud technologies that we do now, we have over 4,000 customers with IBM's hybrid cloud approach. Hybrid cloud enables you also to use the efficiency of cloud and the deployment optimizations and even the operating model of cloud on your own premises. So you don't have to move the data in order to benefit from everything from automation to AI technologies to the efficient development mechanisms that cloud brings in place. And so hybrid cloud is now increasingly being viewed as a solution to that challenge that you mentioned around data protection.
So is it about data protection, or is it more so than it is about speed or latency? I mean, is it all because of data protection?
Yeah, it's interesting. We see also with public cloud that data protection is an increasing topic, even though you might say, oh, cloud is about elasticity or optionality or global expansion. The data protection factor here is really important because every enterprise has a responsibility to steward their data. You and I as consumers, as customers of a bank or a retail organization, we want our data protected. And in many jurisdictions, organizations have an obligation legally to protect their clients' data, not just the reputation with the clients, but also legal and from a regulatory perspective. And when we look at this then in a cloud conversation, it's important both to have hybrid cloud, where you can choose to continue to consume cloud technologies while the data remains on premises, as well as what we would refer to as industry clouds, where in the public cloud, like with IBM's Cloud for Financial Services, you can have industry-leading data protection and data privacy policies, even when deploying in the public cloud. So then you really have optionality. You can have cloud on premises, or you can have it safely in public cloud as well.
Hey, in your role as Chief Technology Officer at IBM, I do wonder, Hillary, too, though, like kind of going back to where we started a little bit macro, what kind of environment are you guys getting ready for, though? I know we talked a little bit about what you're seeing from your customers, but it is kind of a tricky time. And we see inflation continuing to be persistent. Supply chains have gotten better, but we still hear about component problems in various industries, worried about a global economic slowdown. How would you best describe kind of our environment?
Yeah, I think it's an environment with a lot of opportunity, like we were talking about at the beginning. Cloud and technology, everything from, AI technologies to business process automation to the elasticity of cloud. If you don't want to run a business anymore, scale down the consumption of the IT. You didn't invest in it on your premises, you can scale it down in the cloud, as well as continuing also on premises to adopt, faster, more efficient technologies. All these things are key parts of, addressing, where enterprises need to be thinking these days. And I think we're just continuing to invest in those core technologies that are going to help folks, go through this period that we have coming up successfully. I'll also comment, you mentioned supply chain. The topic of risk in the supply chain, also from a cybersecurity perspective, is one that definitely came up in this index that we just released.
Right.
And I think there's a lot of really important work going on in that area as well.
Hey, Hillary, before we let you go, I mean, we hear from a lot of different companies about the cloud, about the hybrid cloud. When a company is considering who to go with, and IBM is one of those choices, what are the competitive advantages that you offer? Like, why choose you rather than, another service provider?
Yeah, this index that we just released of over 3,000 global leaders cited skills, cited security, and cited compliance as three of the top areas for consideration. And at IBM, that's really what we're trying to address. It's a journey. It's a journey to get to the cloud. You need to partner with someone who, like IBM Consulting, has in-house skills to both look at transformation, find those high-value applications, and get you to the cloud. You need to partner with someone who, both in on-premises, with heritage environments as well as with cloud environments, is focused on security and compliance and data protection. And you need to partner with someone that knows your industry. IBM has long been the IT provider to, banks, insurance companies, telcos, you name it, healthcare, government. And so as we look at this next generation of IT, we're also that partner.
All right, good to check in with you and hear about your report. We got to run. Hillary Hunter, Chief Technology Officer at IBM Cloud, with us via Zoom from New York City. All right, that's it. That's a wrap for this first trading day of the fourth quarter. Oh.
What a good one.
What a good one. Have a good and safe evening, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow.